Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 on Wattpad. Now let's start. Izuku Midoriya was known as Egao, the #1 vigilante. To the world, he was a mystery. No one knew his true identity, appearance, or quirk. He preferred it that way. People often speculated about his abilities, guessing they might be related to speed, strength, or analysis. In truth, those were just skills he had honed through years of training. The reality was that he was quirkless, cast aside by society, and often overlooked. Who would care for a boy without a quirk? Izuku hadn't always felt this way. The turning point in his life could be summed up in a single word: quirkless. It was astonishing how one word could alter the course of a person's existence. Life had never been easy for him, especially as he faced the harsh reality of being labeled useless or worthless. The day that changed everything was supposed to be the greatest day of his life. Like any child, he had dreams of becoming a hero, inspired by his idol, All Might. He had worked hard to achieve that dream, but no one believed he could succeed. It was the day he would discover his quirk, a moment that would redefine his future. Years earlier, a young Izuku, filled with excitement, eagerly anticipated the moment he would learn about his quirk. He jumped up and down, expressing his enthusiasm to his parents. His father, Hisashi, lifted him up and asked which quirk he hoped to inherit, his or his mother's. Izuku chose his father's fire-breathing ability, thinking it was the coolest. Hisashi playfully teased 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, Izuku's mother, about their son's choice. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 smiled, expressing her happiness as long as Izuku was content. The anticipation of discovering his quirk filled Izuku with joy. He was on the brink of becoming a hero like All Might. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically at the doctor's office. The doctor delivered the crushing news that Izuku was quirkless. Shock and heartbreak enveloped both him and his mother. The moment felt surreal, as if he were plummeting into an endless void. Overwhelmed with emotion, he began to cry, feeling as though his world had crumbled. On the drive home, silence hung heavily in the air. Izuku sensed the weight of the situation, and though he wanted to speak, words failed him. His mother, visibly shaken, entered the house with him trailing behind. Hisashi noticed 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's distress and inquired about what was wrong. 𝐀𝐮𝐭 struggled to articulate the news, finally revealing that Izuku was quirkless. Hisashi's initial sadness quickly morphed into anger, flames flickering from his mouth as he grappled with the reality of the situation. Izuku and 𝐀𝐮𝐭 had never seen him like this before. 𝐀𝐮𝐭 attempted to calm Hisashi, but he was consumed by his emotions. He knelt down to Izuku, disappointment evident in his eyes. Unable to meet his father's gaze, Izuku felt shame wash over him. Hisashi lifted Izuku's chin, forcing him to look up. Izuku stammered an apology, but Hisashi's response was harsh. He called Izuku a disappointment and walked toward the door. 𝐀𝐮𝐭's voice trembled as she pleaded with him not to leave. Hisashi's cold glare sent chills down Izuku's spine as he stepped out, leaving a void behind. 𝐀𝐮𝐭 fell to her knees, heartbroken, while Izuku cried, feeling an unbearable weight in his chest. He wondered if things would have been different if he had a quirk. As tears streamed down his face, 𝐀𝐮𝐭 beckoned him over, and they embraced on the floor, sharing their grief. After a while, 𝐀𝐮𝐭 encouraged Izuku to play with his toys, trying to lift his spirits. She remained on the couch, lost in her thoughts, her heart heavy with sorrow. Hours later, as bedtime approached, Izuku momentarily forgot the day's events, running into his room with a smile. But when 𝐀𝐮𝐭 entered, her expression was one of shock, unable to comprehend why her son was smiling after such a painful day. How could he be happy and accustomed to it already? She sat down on the bed next to him. Before Izuku fell asleep, she and Hisashi always told him a story and gave him a kiss on his forehead, leaving him with a smile or a laugh. She was going to miss doing that with Hisashi. Izuku looked up with a confused expression and asked where his father was and if he was coming home late. That was when it all clicked. He had forgotten what had just happened. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her small, worried son. He asked again, his voice trembling, wanting to know why she was crying and where his father was. She hugged him tightly, gathering the strength to remind him of the truth. She exclaimed that she was sorry, startling him. He asked what she was sorry for, his worry deepening. She struggled to explain, telling him that his father had left and wasn't coming back. As she cried, she held Izuku even tighter. In that moment, Izuku remembered everything. The pain of his father leaving, the disappointment over his lack of a quirk. He hugged his mother again, tears streaming down his face, and asked if his father would come back. Her response was a soft apology, leaving him with a heavy heart. Izuku and his mother had been feeling down ever since 𝐻𝐻𝐸 left. They had grown quieter and spoken less. He missed his father dearly. While playing with his All Might figurines in the living room, the doorbell rang. His mother rushed to answer it, revealing 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, whom Izuku affectionately called 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Inko greeted 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and asked what brought him there. He wanted to know if Izuku could come out to play. Inko called for Izuku and he ran to the door, his face lighting up at the sight of his friend. Excitedly, he nodded when his mother asked if he wanted to play outside. She reminded him to come back before dark, ruffling his messy green hair. He dashed out with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, heading to their favorite park. As they played, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 asked about Izuku's quirk. Izuku hesitated, but before he could respond, 𝐀𝐻𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 continued, asking if he had inherited his mother's or father's quirk. He praised both, imagining their future as pro-heroes together, just like All Might. With a heavy heart, Izuku admitted that he was quirkless. 𝐀𝐻𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 was taken aback, and Izuku stammered an apology. But 𝐀𝐻𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's words cut deep as he called Izuku a Deku, declaring that he would be a useless quirkless person from now on. Those words shattered Izuku's heart, and he couldn't hold back his tears. 𝐀𝐻𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's harshness stung, and he walked away, leaving Izuku alone and heartbroken. Inko sat on the couch, lost in thoughts of 𝐻𝐻𝐸, when the doorbell rang again. She opened it to find Izuku, tears streaming down his face. Surprised to see him back so soon, she picked him up and wiped his tears, asking what had happened. He sniffled, explaining that 𝐀𝐻𝐿 said they were no longer friends and called him a Deku. Even without the full story, Inko understood the pain her son was feeling. She hugged him tightly as he cried himself to sleep. The doorbell rang once more, waking Izuku. He rubbed his eyes and asked who was at the door. Inko didn't know but suggested they check. As she opened the door, her heart stopped. Standing there was 𝐻𝐻𝐸, the man she thought had left them for good. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 apologized for what had happened, expressing his longing to return and asking for forgiveness. Inko was speechless, torn between joy and uncertainty. She glanced at Izuku, who was smiling brightly at the sight of his father. She finally found her voice, assuring 𝐻𝐻𝐸 that they would be happy to have him back. They embraced, and Izuku joyfully exclaimed how much he missed his father. However, 𝐻𝐻𝐸's expression changed, and Izuku felt a chill as he stepped back, sensing something was off. Inko suggested they all have breakfast together, and 𝐻𝐻𝐸 agreed. They sat down to eat, but then Inko received a call about work. She hesitated, but 𝐻𝐻𝐸 insisted she go, offering to spend some father-son bonding time with Izuku. As Inko left, Izuku felt a mix of excitement and fear at being alone with his father. He was giving her a look that sent chills down her spine. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling. They were going to have a lot of fun, he replied with a smirk, forming a fist that moved toward her direction. She called out for her mother, hoping she would rush through the door. A few hours later, Inko was coming home from work, her thoughts drifting to 𝐻𝐻𝐸 and Izuku. As she reached their doorstep and walked inside, she found 𝐻𝐻𝐸 and Izuku sitting on the couch. Instead of seeing them happy or playing, she noticed Izuku covered in bandages, a small amount of blood visible, while 𝐻𝐻𝐸 held him in his lap, seemingly comforting him. "What happened?" she exclaimed, rushing toward them. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 lied, saying he had taken Izuku to the playground where he fell off the slide. Inko, unaware of the truth, gasped in concern. "Oh no, Izuku," she said, wrapping her arms around the crying boy. "Mommy." Izuku sobbed into her embrace. "How did you fall off the slide, honey?" she asked gently. Izuku wanted to tell her the truth, that they had never gone to the park and that he had never fallen off any slide. His father had warned him not to reveal everything that had happened while she was away, threatening that he would be hurt even more if he did. I slipped from the top, he lied, his heart heavy. It's okay, Izuku. You'll be alright. Let's get you an ice pack and some ice cream to cheer you up, 𝐻𝐿𝐴 said, trying to lift his spirits. Okay, mommy, he replied, feeling a flicker of hope. Years passed, and at 12 years old, Izuku reflected on how things had changed since his father returned. There were always excuses for his injuries. He had fallen down the stairs, tripped on the way home, or gotten hurt while watching heroes and villains fight. His mother believed every word, and he couldn't blame her. She had done nothing wrong. No one suspected that 𝐻𝐵 was not who he seemed. Izuku had kept silent about the true nature of his home life, fearful of the threats from his father. But today felt different. As they ate breakfast, his mother's phone rang, and he went through his morning routine. After she left for work, he would face 𝐻𝐵 alone. Well, I guess it's time for work, 𝐻𝐿𝐴 said, placing her dishes in the sink. Okay, Mom, he replied, sighing as he poked at his omelet, feeling dread at what awaited him. I'm sorry I have to go, Izuku. I'll ask my boss for a day off tomorrow to spend time with you. How does that sound? She offered. He glanced at 𝐻𝐵 and then back at his mother. Why, can you please ask him? He mumbled, looking down at his plate. Of course, 𝐬𝐿𝐴, she said, kissing his forehead. He cherished that nickname, finding it endearing and comforting. Bye, honey. Bye, Izuku, she called as she left. Bye, Mom, he said softly. Get up, brat, 𝐻𝐵 commanded. Okay, he replied, rising to his feet. As he stood, he braced himself for what was to come. He was thrown across the room, enduring the familiar pain. He had grown accustomed to it, suppressing his tears. Just as he was about to be struck again, a voice rang out. What is going on in here? 𝐻𝐿𝐴 had returned, having forgotten something. She rushed in and saw Izuku in distress, immediately wrapping her arms around him protectively, refusing to let 𝐻𝐵 come any closer. She couldn't believe this was what happened every time she left for work. Her heart ached for her son. 𝐻𝐿𝐴, 𝐻𝐵 said, his tone firm. What are you doing, 𝐻𝐵? 𝐻𝐿𝐴 shouted, her voice filled with fear and anger. Move out of the way, 𝐻𝐿𝐴, he insisted. No. She yelled defiantly. It's fine, Izuku said weakly. And no, it's not fine, Izuku. This has been happening to you since you were 4 years old. I'm your mother. I should have known. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 cried, tears streaming down her face. 𝐻𝐿𝐴, move, 𝐻𝐵 repeated. No. You're not getting anywhere near Izuku. She shouted, her determination unwavering. 𝐻𝐿𝐴's tears reflected her guilt and betrayal, and Izuku could see the weight of pain on her face. He wished he could ease her suffering, but he felt equally trapped. After that day, 𝐻𝐿𝐴 faced the same treatment Izuku had endured for years, though thankfully it was less severe. She would drop him off at school to spare him from 𝐻𝐵's wrath, but the bullying from 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 and his friends continued. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 grew increasingly worried about the injuries he brought home, but Izuku was skilled at crafting excuses, shielding her from more stress. A week later, as he walked home from school, he heard cheers and turned to see the pro hero 𝐴ndeavor apprehending 3 beaten men. They looked like villains, and Izuku felt a flicker of hope that perhaps justice was being served. A massive crowd of reporters rushed to get interviews, cameras clicking everywhere. Soon, police arrived to take the 3 villains away while 𝐴ndeavor continued to ignore the reporters and anyone else in his path. There was something Izuku needed to tell him. He desperately wanted to confide in someone, and who better than one of the top 3 heroes himself? All Might seemed like the perfect person to talk to, but since he was number 1, Izuku assumed he was busy with a tight schedule. This might be his only chance. He had to ask 𝐴ndeavor. Izuku waited until the area was clear. The reporters had left, the police had departed, and now only he and 𝐴ndeavor remained. Just as 𝐴ndeavor was about to take off, Izuku called out for him to stop. 𝐴ndeavor groaned, clearly annoyed, and asked what Izuku wanted. Izuku stammered, pleading for a moment of his time. 𝐴ndeavor, however, brushed him aside, insisting he had a busy schedule and to get out of his way. Izuku, feeling desperate, admitted he needed help. Endeavor's thoughts were elsewhere. He considered how helping Izuku could enhance his own fame and glory. He asked what kind of help Izuku needed, and the boy hesitated, fiddling with his fingers. When he mentioned problems at home, Endeavor interrupted with laughter, questioning why he should help with such matters. He dismissed Izuku, leaving him speechless and alone. Izuku stood there, feeling crushed. He walked home, greeted by his mother, who noticed his tears. She pulled him into a small hug, asking why he was crying. Izuku reassured her that it was nothing, but he felt the weight of his struggles. Would All Might ever help a quirkless kid like him? After his encounter with Endeavor, Izuku felt increasingly down. In class, as he prepared to leave, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 snatched his notebook from his hands. Bakugo flipped through the pages, mocking Izuku's hero analysis. Despite Izuku's attempts to defend himself, Bakugo belittled him, declaring he would never become a hero. He suggested that Izuku should pray for a quirk in his next life and take a leap off the roof. Izuku stood helpless, trying to process Bakugo's words. He fought against the negativity, reminding himself to keep his head up and smile, just like All Might. On his way home, Izuku witnessed a battle between heroes and a villain. Death Arms, Backdraft, and Kamui Woods were engaged in a fierce fight against a massive foe. Izuku took notes on their quirks and strategies, excited to learn. Just as he was leaving, he heard screams and turned to see Bakugo captured by a villain. Panic surged through him as he realized the heroes couldn't save him. In a moment of instinct, Izuku found himself running toward the villain, despite the heroes shouting for him to stop. He felt a surge of determination. What would a hero do? He recalled a technique from his notes and quickly took off his backpack, using it to distract the villain by throwing it at his eye. The villain flinched, creating an opening for Bakugo. Izuku rushed to Bakugo, digging at the slime holding him captive. Bakugo yelled in disbelief, but Izuku insisted he couldn't just stand by and watch him get hurt. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to free his friend, trying to smile despite the fear. Just as he was making progress, the villain wrapped more slime around Bakugo, pushing Izuku to the ground. The villain taunted him, and Izuku felt terror wash over him. What could he do now? Maybe he could fight back, but who was he kidding? He couldn't fight. After all, he was just a quirkless Deku. The sludge villain had picked him up and wrapped him in the slime, trapping him just like 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Now, both he and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 were caught in the villain's grasp. He felt the air slipping away, struggling to breathe. Was this the end? He thought of his mom and whispered a silent goodbye. Soon his eyes closed, and he fell unconscious. From Bakugo's perspective, he couldn't believe the situation. That stupid nerd was always following him, and now he had gotten himself into this mess too. He glanced back at Deku and noticed his eyes were closed. Panic surged through him. He called out to Deku, his voice rising in urgency. He couldn't be dead already. Where was all that hero talk Deku had been so proud of? Bakugo yelled for Deku to respond, his worry escalating. He focused on Deku and, to his relief, saw him breathing, albeit faintly. The heroes were barely doing anything to help, just standing around and calling for others with suitable quirks. Bakugo felt the pressure of the slime closing in, making it harder to breathe. He couldn't let a villain take him down. He was determined to be the #1 hero and surpass All Might. Frustration bubbled within him as he wondered what was taking so long. Suddenly, he heard cheering from the crowd. Why were they cheering? Had they lost their minds? He looked up to see Hawks, the #3 pro hero, descending towards them. Hawks flapped his wings with such force that it blew the sludge villain away, freeing them from its grasp. Hawks landed nearby and checked on them. Bakugo, still annoyed, pointed out that Deku was the one in trouble. Hawks approached Deku, shaking him gently to wake him up. Izuku's eyes fluttered open at the sound of someone calling for him. It was Hawks, the #3 hero. He jumped up, excitement coursing through him. He couldn't believe it. He had so many questions to ask, pulling out his notebook in a flurry. Hawks looked confused as Izuku bombarded him with questions. Hawks raised his hands to calm him down, reminding him to take it easy. He assured Izuku that he was fine but had to leave for another mission. Izuku admired Hawk's catchphrase, which always made him smile. Bakugo, however, was furious. He yelled at Izuku for getting involved, insisting he never asked for help. Izuku looked down, apologizing for his actions. After Bakugo stormed off, the heroes lectured Izuku about the dangers of his actions, leaving him feeling guilty as he walked home. When he arrived home, he was immediately enveloped in a tight hug from his crying mother. She had seen the news and was frantic with worry. Izuku tried to reassure her, feeling guilty for causing her distress. Earlier, Inko had been watching the news when she saw the incident unfold. Her heart sank when she recognized Katsuki and then Izuku on the screen. She panicked, dropping her cup as tears streamed down her face, praying for their safety. Back in the present, Inko and Izuku held each other tightly. After a moment, she shifted into her protective mom mode, scolding him for his reckless actions. Izuku apologized, explaining that he hadn't thought, he had just acted on instinct, wanting to help like a hero would. Inko hugged him again, tears of pride in her eyes. She loved that about him. Everything had been going as usual for Izuku. He faced beatings at home and bullying at school, a relentless 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴. During a test at school, he noticed 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and his two friends glancing at his paper. It was frustrating that the teacher hadn't caught on to their antics. After finishing his test, he placed his paper on the teacher's desk, only to see 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 and his goons do the same moments later. As he exited the classroom after being dismissed, he hurried to avoid any encounters, but one of the goons shoved him into a locker. The goon taunted him, calling him a pathetic quirkless loser. Izuku stammered that he needed to leave early to avoid worrying his mother. The other goon mocked him, kicking him across the floor. He pleaded for them to stop, but they continued to shove and kick him. Just then, Bakugo approached, questioning what they were doing. One of the goons claimed they were just having fun with the nerd. Taking advantage of the distraction, Izuku tried to crawl away, but Bakugo noticed and approached him. Izuku quietly explained that he needed to go, but one of the goons grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground. The goon challenged him to escape, tightening his grip. Izuku gasped for breath, pleading for them to let him go. The goons laughed, showing no concern for his distress. Bakugo, annoyed, dismissed Izuku's pleas. The laughter continued, and Izuku felt a surge of anger. He shouted for them to leave him alone, surprising everyone with the intensity of his voice. Bakugo and the goons flinched, taken aback by his outburst. Realizing what he had done, Izuku quickly apologized, but one of the goons pushed him into the locker again, yelling at him for speaking back. As tears streamed down his face, he begged for forgiveness, but Bakugo kicked him, and the bullying intensified. In a shaky voice, Izuku asked Bakugo what he had done to deserve this treatment. Bakugo remained silent, only responding with a punch that left Izuku gasping. Despite his pain, he expressed a longing to be friends, but Bakugo rejected him vehemently, pushing him to the ground. The physical pain was overwhelming, but the emotional hurt from their words cut deeper. Izuku felt trapped in a 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 of pain, longing for it to end. Bakugo watched Izuku with a mix of confusion and unease as Izuku smiled, saying he would do something. Bakugo felt a chill run down his spine, unsure of what Izuku meant. When Izuku walked away, Bakugo's curiosity grew, but he dismissed it, trying to shake off his unease. Suddenly, screams erupted from outside the school. Bakugo and his goons rushed out to find students in distress. He approached a girl who was crying, and she pointed upward. Following her gaze, he saw something falling from the sky. Panic surged through him as he recognized the figure. "Deku!" he shouted, racing to catch the falling boy. Izuku, in his own thoughts, felt utterly alone. He believed no one loved him except for his mother. The pain he experienced felt insurmountable, and he wished for it to end. Voices echoed in his mind, reminding him of his struggles and failures. He questioned why his life was filled with such suffering, feeling as if no one would come to his. After all, he was quirkless. The taunts echoed in his mind, each word a reminder of his limitations. The bullies surrounded him, their jeers cutting deep. He felt overwhelmed, unable to bear the weight of their words any longer. He could hear Bakugo's voice, filled with disdain, declaring that he could never be a hero. The thought of it all was suffocating. He wanted it to end, to escape from the pain. He contemplated a drastic decision, a grin forming on his face as he considered the unthinkable. Bakugo, oblivious to the turmoil within, questioned him with a tone that suggested he didn't care. But the determination in Izuku's heart was resolute. He walked away, leaving his bully stunned. Sitting on the edge of a rooftop, he penned a note to his mother, knowing it would break her heart. The wind tousled his hair as he prepared to take a leap, thinking of Bakugo and the cruel words that had pushed him to this point. In a flash, he stood at the edge, ready to say goodbye. Meanwhile, Bakugo's heart raced as he witnessed Izuku fall. Panic surged through him as he sprinted toward where Izuku had landed. The world around him blurred, and he felt a sense of dread wash over him. He reached Izuku's still form, collapsing to his knees in shock. The sight was overwhelming. He couldn't comprehend the reality of what had happened. As sirens wailed in the distance, Bakugo's cries filled the air, desperation lacing his voice as he begged for Izuku to wake up. The chaos around him intensified as paramedics arrived, rushing to save his friend. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 was washing dishes when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was somber, delivering news that shattered her world. Her son had fallen from a building, and the pain in her heart was unbearable. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, unable to process the horror of the situation. In the hospital, frantic voices filled the air as doctors fought to stabilize Izuku. The tension was palpable, and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's cries echoed in the sterile environment. Hours later, Izuku's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his mind as he adjusted to the bright light above him. A nurse approached, her gentle demeanor offering a sense of comfort. They spoke about heroes, and Izuku's admiration for All Might shone through, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. But when the nurse asked why he had attempted to end his life, Izuku's heart sank. He hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The nurse's kindness wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and he found himself breaking down in tears. She reassured him, speaking softly about his mother's worry. Izuku felt a mix of emotions, unsure of how to express his feelings. When his parents entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 rushed to him, tears in her eyes, while his father, 𝐻𝐵, attempted to convey concern. Izuku felt a sense of disconnect, sensing the performance in 𝐻𝐵's words. The doctor's presence provided a buffer, but the tension remained thick in the air. The room was filled with unspoken emotions, and Izuku realized that healing would take time. But for now, he was alive, and that was a start. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 expressed her deep concern, her voice filled with worry. Izuku remained silent, unsure of how to respond. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 questioned him, seeking to understand his actions, but he offered no answer. Instead, she embraced him tightly. They spent some time together, while 𝐻𝐵, Izuku's father, remained quiet. Suddenly, another doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand. He greeted Izuku and confirmed his identity, asking if the couple beside him were indeed his parents. After receiving confirmation, the doctor requested 𝐻𝐵 and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 to sign a form. Once they completed the paperwork, the doctor informed Izuku that he could return home, but he needed to be cautious for the next 7 days. This meant no rough activities for a week. As they drove home, Izuku sat beside his mother in the back seat, while 𝐻𝐵 focused on the road. The car ride was filled with silence. Upon arriving home, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 suggested that Izuku take a few days off from school. Life resumed its usual rhythm, but without the usual hardships. The week passed quickly, and Izuku wished it could last forever. He enjoyed a break from pain, but he knew it would soon return, both at home and school. The thought of returning to school filled him with dread, especially the idea of facing 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴. In desperation, he approached his mother with a request. He asked if he could be homeschooled. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 was surprised but agreed, wanting to support her son. A week later, Izuku had been teaching himself and found he was learning more than he ever did at school. His mother was proud, while 𝐻𝐵 remained indifferent. As long as 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 cared, that was what mattered to him. One day, he asked his mother if he could go out for a while. She agreed but asked him to pick up groceries on his way back. He left the house, encountering 𝐻𝐵 at the door, who inquired about his destination. Izuku nervously replied that he was just going to get groceries, and 𝐻𝐵 instructed him to pick up some soba. As he walked to a nearby park, he heard a familiar voice that filled him with excitement. It was All Might. He rushed toward the sound, hoping he wasn't too late. Upon arriving, he found a crowd surrounding All Might, taking pictures and asking questions. All Might announced he had to leave, and Izuku felt a surge of urgency. He couldn't let his idol leave without speaking to him. Just as All Might was about to take off, Izuku grabbed his leg. All Might, startled, questioned what Izuku was doing. The boy insisted he needed to talk to him, but All Might, in a panic, urged him to let go. Izuku, fearing he would be left behind, clung on tightly. All Might, realizing the situation, landed on a nearby rooftop. Once there, All Might informed Izuku that he had to leave. The boy, desperate, called out to him, but All Might was already feeling the pressure of his transformation. He explained briefly about his secret identity, and Izuku promised he wouldn't tell anyone. Izuku expressed his dream of becoming a hero, just like All Might. He asked if a quirkless kid like him could ever hope to be a hero. All Might, with a heavy heart, explained that while he couldn't guarantee success without a power, there were still other ways to be a hero, like being part of the police force. Feeling disheartened, Izuku watched as All Might prepared to leave. The words of his idol echoed in his mind, and he felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. He wished someone would have told him he could be a hero. After All Might departed, Izuku reflected on his feelings. He remembered how worried his mother had been when he had jumped before. He hated seeing her upset and realized he didn't want to cause her pain again. He vowed to himself that he would become a hero, even without a quirk, and even if no one believed in him. He would become his own hero. No matter what, Izuku was determined not to quit. He felt strongly that he could prove All Might wrong and become a hero. As he walked home with groceries and his dad 𝐬𝐫, his mother, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, greeted him with joy. She noticed something was off and asked what had happened. Izuku, trying to brush it off, insisted that nothing was wrong. However, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨, knowing her son well, could see the distress on his face. She inquired if 𝐻𝐵 had done something to upset him, to which Izuku replied that 𝐻𝐵 did something every day. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨's expression turned somber as she reflected on her own feelings of helplessness. Izuku quickly reassured her that it wasn't her fault, but she continued to blame herself for their situation. She expressed her longing to be strong enough to protect him, her voice trembling with emotion. Izuku, unable to bear seeing her like this, took her hands and insisted that none of it was her fault. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨, with a fierce determination, declared that she was glad Izuku had gotten involved, as it meant he was no longer in the dark about the dangers they faced. Izuku clenched his fists, feeling the weight of their shared pain. She reminded him that if he was hurt, she was hurt too, and urged him never to think it was his fault. After a moment of silence, Izuku attempted to lighten the mood by complimenting her strength, which led to a heartfelt apology from 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨. They shared a brief laugh, but the underlying tension remained. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 then asked what had upset him, to which Izuku quickly dismissed it, claiming he felt better now and rushed to his room. Once inside, he spent 2 hours brainstorming ways to become a hero, but exhaustion set in as he struggled to come up with any viable ideas. He felt overwhelmed by the challenge ahead. Meanwhile, a news report about a vigilante caught his attention. Intrigued, he approached his mother, who was watching the broadcast. She expressed her admiration for vigilantes, seeing them as heroes who fought crime and saved lives. This sparked an idea in Izuku's mind. Perhaps he could become a vigilante himself. With newfound determination, he resolved to take on the identity of Egao, the vigilante, a name that meant smile. He wanted to bring joy and hope to others through his actions. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨, reflecting on her son's recent struggles, felt a mix of concern and love. She had noticed changes in Izuku since his hospital discharge, particularly the dullness in his eyes. Despite the challenges they faced with 𝐻𝐵, she remained hopeful after their conversation about vigilantes. Izuku, now in middle school, was deeply focused on his goal of becoming a vigilante. He envisioned himself as Egao, the one who would bring smiles to people's faces and make a difference in their lives. I wanted to be the kind of hero who could save anyone. I had the name, but I didn't have the costume. As I walked to my closet and rummaged through my hoods and clothing, I hoped to find something suitable for a vigilante outfit. My closet was messy and mostly empty, containing only 4 hoods, 2 shirts, 3 pajamas, and my school uniform along with some briefs and shorts. Nothing here would work. Suddenly, I remembered a website that heroes and villains used to get their costumes. The heroes weren't pleased that the store also catered to villains, but the owner refused to stop, and since it was the best costume design shop in Japan, they had to accept it. After all, the heroes saw no harm in villains purchasing costumes from the store. I pulled out my old phone and searched for the website. If I was going to be a vigilante, I needed to keep my identity a secret. I grabbed a piece of paper and began sketching my vigilante suit. Once I was satisfied with the design, I submitted it on the website, including all the necessary details. From what I had heard, the man who ran the shop had a fabric-related quirk. He could manipulate any kind of clothing or fabric and even create it by activating his quirk. The fabric would emerge from his hands, eventually transforming into the costume he was crafting. I also heard he was an exceptional fighter. Some villains had attempted to kidnap him to force him to make clothing and gadgets for their use, but he had fought them off decisively. Knowing it would be difficult to create a costume myself, I decided to pay someone to make it for me, allowing me to add my own details later. The shop owner was known for keeping secrets, which reassured me that I could trust him with my identity. He never revealed anyone's identity to heroes or villains, even under threat. Both sides relied on him for costumes, which meant he was safe from harm. All I had to do now was wait for him to finish. 3 weeks later, I still hadn't received any messages from the costume makers. While reading a book, I heard a notification sound from my phone. Picking it up, I smiled at the message informing me that my costume was ready for pickup in an hour. The shop was 30 minutes away, so I took the subway. As I stood holding onto the pole, I tensed up when I spotted him, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. In the mind of a 12-year-old Bakugo, he grumbled about being sent to buy groceries with money he found pointless. It had been a month since Deku had passed away, and he felt responsible. All Deku ever wanted was to be a hero and his friend, and Bakugo regretted not being a better friend. He missed him dearly. As he rode the subway, he scanned the crowd and his eyes widened when he spotted a green-haired boy wearing a hood. He recognized those emerald eyes, curly green hair, and freckles instantly. The figure flinched and darted toward the back of the subway. Bakugo chased after him, but by the time he reached the end, the boy had vanished. He sighed, realizing it must have been a trick of his mind. Meanwhile, Izuku hid beneath an old man's seat, feeling guilty for not asking before taking refuge there. Once he saw Bakugo leave, he crawled out. The old man asked what he was doing down there and playfully tapped him on the head with his walking stick. Izuku apologized, explaining he just wanted to hide from someone. "The blonde-haired boy, huh?" the old man inquired. "Why, yeah," Izuku replied. "He doesn't seem like a threat," the old man said, puzzled. Izuku knew better. "No, he's not exactly a threat. It's just personal between us. If he's a troublemaker, I won't hesitate to teach him a lesson," the old man declared, raising his walking stick. Nearby passengers shot them questioning looks, urging them to keep it down. "It's fine. I don't mean to be rude, but I don't think you can beat him," Izuku admitted shyly. Oh really?" the old man said, studying him. Izuku awkwardly laughed, unsure how to respond. "All right, kid, have you ever heard of the hero?" he began, then shouted, "𝐴𝐵𝐴. Everyone in the subway, including Izuku, covered their ears. The bus driver even jumped in surprise. A man yelled for silence, and Izuku quickly apologized. "𝐴𝐵𝐴? No, I've never heard of that hero," Izuku said thoughtfully. "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not that old." 𝐴𝐵𝐴 exclaimed, but Izuku quickly covered his mouth. "Please be quiet," the man from the back shouted again. "Maybe you should speak a little more quietly, sir," Izuku suggested. "Don't call me Mr. He makes me sound old," 𝐴𝐵𝐴 yelled. "Stop yelling," the man shouted once more. "Sorry, just don't yell please," Izuku said, feeling flustered. They were being too loud, so one of them spoke quietly. Another person asked if they could ask a few questions about their quirk while flipping through a notebook. A third individual, looking confused, asked who they were. Suddenly, a loud yell broke out, demanding silence. The bus driver, frustrated with the commotion, literally tossed one of them out of the bus. Fortunately, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, being older, remained on board. After being thrown out, the individual noticed that the shop was only 3 minutes away. They got up, dusted off their breaths, and decided to walk the rest of the way. Upon arrival, they found the shop to be quite small. Walking inside, they saw a man who appeared to be the shop owner. The individual greeted him. Hesitantly, the owner recognized them and called them by the wrong name. After a brief correction, the owner apologized and asked what they needed. The individual mentioned they were there for their costume. The owner went into another room to retrieve it. Curiosity piqued, the individual asked the owner if they could keep their name and identity confidential. The owner agreed enthusiastically. Then he inquired about what a kid would do with a costume like that, suggesting that it was usually heroes who ordered costumes, and questioned whether the individual was even old enough for hero school. With a sigh, the individual explained that they intended to fight crime in secret. When pressed for more details, they revealed their aspiration to become a vigilante. The owner returned with a box in his hands and expressed concern about the individual's young age. The individual admitted they were 12 but would soon turn 13. The owner cautioned them about the dangers of being a vigilante. The individual shared their struggles of being quirkless and how they had been labeled as useless. They spoke of a person they looked up to who had crushed their dreams of becoming a hero, and how they wanted to prove everyone wrong. They were determined to be a hero, even if it meant taking an unconventional path. The owner expressed admiration for the individual's determination but seemed puzzled by the name, Deku, that the individual mentioned. The individual explained it was a name used by bullies to mock them, but the owner suggested they should see it as a compliment, as it sounded like a word meaning, "I can do it." The individual was surprised by this perspective and shared their vigilante name, Egao, which meant smile. The owner encouraged them, wishing them luck on their journey to becoming a hero while handing over the box. The individual felt emotional and expressed their gratitude. The owner reassured them that they could return anytime and even suggested hanging out in the future. With a promise to come back, the individual left the shop, feeling that their path to becoming a vigilante had finally begun. As they walked home with the costume in the box, they were met by their father, who demanded to know where they had been and what was in the box. The father snatched it away and was about to open it when the individual quickly fabricated an excuse about a school project that had been ruined. The father dropped the box in disgust and reacted angrily, striking the individual in frustration. After the father stormed out, the individual picked up the box and retreated to their room, placing it in the closet. They tended to a minor injury sustained during the encounter and noticed a note on the fridge indicating that their mother was out shopping. Feeling a mix of emotions, they returned to the box, sat on the floor, and opened it. When they saw the costume inside, they were filled with shock and excitement, as it looked just as they had envisioned. It was amazing. Izuku returned to his closet and pulled out a can of spray paint he had acquired for his project. He painted a little smiley face on it, feeling satisfied with his work. After putting his costume back into the box, he stuffed it into the closet. An hour had passed, and his mother should have been home by now. He wondered why she was taking so long. Perhaps she was caught in traffic. No, his father had taken the car, so she must have been walking. Looking out the window, he noticed it was getting dark, and worry began to creep in. Maybe she had run into a friend along the way. Shaking off the thought for now, he ran to his closet and retrieved his vigilante costume. He opened it and walked to the window, glancing back at his outfit, deep in thought. He questioned whether he was ready. Putting on the costume, he picked up his mask and brought it to his face, testing it out. His voice sounded different, almost like a man's voice, thanks to Mr. Flick's voice changer. He approached the window, hesitating for a moment before taking a deep breath. He had already come this far. He needed to go through with it. With determination, he jumped out of the window and landed on another roof. Looking back at his window, he sighed, realizing there was no turning back now. Deciding to head toward the grocery store where his mother had said she was going, He jumped from roof to roof until he arrived. He perched on the edge of a roof, hoping to catch a glimpse of her as people entered and exited the store. He waited for 1 minute, then 5, 10, and finally 15 minutes. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he kept a hard gaze on the grocery store doors. He had called her 5 times, but there was still no response. Pulling out his phone, he checked his contacts. He had only 3 numbers: his mother, father, and Mr. Flick. His father had insisted on limiting his contacts to avoid anyone discovering their home life, and the same rule applied to his mother. She wasn't even allowed to have her sister or any friends in her contacts. Mr. Flick was in his contacts as his tutor. Calling his mother again, he noticed something unsettling. This time, instead of a missed call, she had declined it. His heart raced. Something was wrong. Suddenly, he heard a scream coming from a nearby alley. His eyes widened, and he sprinted toward the sound. In the alley, he spotted a girl around his age, trembling in fear with small bruises on her. To his right stood a villain, a gun pointed at the girl. The villain had not noticed him yet, hidden in the shadows. As he stepped into the light, he recognized her. He addressed her, shocked to see Magna, the villain responsible for the death of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. She smirked, demanding he put his hands up. He countered her demand, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He pleaded with her to lower the gun and let the girl go, but she laughed, taunting him for not wanting to fight. A part of him felt disappointed, but he couldn't let that show. Magna's expression shifted to one of anger as she charged at him. She threw a punch aimed at his stomach, but he dodged quickly and tackled her, pinning her down. In her hand, he noticed a phone that looked familiar. It was his mother's phone. Realization hit him hard. This was why she hadn't answered his calls. Behind Magna, he spotted his mother, who seemed to be protected by the girl. Rage surged through him. Not only had Magna attacked an innocent, but she had also endangered his mother. While he was lost in thought, Magna broke free and assumed a fighting stance, demanding to know who he was. He muttered that he was her worst nightmare before charging at her, landing a punch that should have knocked her out. Instead, she recovered quickly and retaliated, landing a blow to his stomach. She taunted him, but he refused to back down. With his mother's safety in mind, he spun and kicked her into the alley wall, watching as she staggered. Taking advantage of her disorientation, he approached her to ensure she was unconscious. Remembering his mother's phone, he retrieved it from Magna's pocket and walked over to his mother and the girl. He handed the phone to his mother, who thanked him with a smile. He turned to the girl, asking if she was okay. She bowed in gratitude, introducing herself as 𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐼. He requested that she call the police to take care of the villain, and she quickly nodded, dialing on her phone. After confirming that help would arrive shortly, he expressed his gratitude and pulled out a sticky note from his utility belt. He drew a smiley face on it and wrote Egao, deciding that the smiley face would be his logo. Just as he was about to leave, Momo asked if he was a hero. He replied that he wasn't exactly a hero, and when she pressed for his identity, he introduced himself as Egao, the Vigilante. Momo noted that Egao meant smile, and he confirmed it with a smile beneath his mask. As he prepared to depart, he heard 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's voice in his head, reminding him not to be called Mr. because it made him sound old. With a chuckle, he smiled again, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Well, thank you," she said. He jumped onto a roof and watched from a distance as 2 police cars and a pro hero arrived to take Magna. He removed his mask and let out a sigh. It felt good to save someone. Remembering his mother, he realized she would be worried if he didn't come home, so he ran back and snuck through the window. He quickly changed out of his costume and into his pajamas. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 knocked on his door and asked if he was in there. He replied that he was just changing and requested she not come in. She apologized and he reassured her it was okay. Remembering the day, he asked why she had come home so late. He already knew the answer, but she didn't know he was there. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 explained that she had been attacked by a villain. He expressed concern, asking if she was okay. She assured him she was fine and shared that a girl about his age named 𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻𝐼 had also been attacked, but an amazing vigilante had come to their rescue. He smiled and eagerly asked her to tell him everything that happened. Meanwhile, at another location, Detective 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 was speaking with 𝐻𝐼ROZU. He asked if she had seen any parts of the villain's face. She replied that he had been wearing a mask. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 confirmed the vigilante's name was Egao, which meant smile. He inquired if there had been anyone else at the scene, to which she mentioned a lady but did not know her name. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 asked her to recount the entire story. 𝐻𝐼ROZU explained that she had gone out for fresh air while waiting for her ride when she heard a woman scream. She rushed to investigate and saw a villain threatening the lady with a weapon. Despite her efforts to confront him, she felt outmatched until the vigilante appeared and subdued the villain. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 thanked her for her help and allowed her to leave. The next day, 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 met with 𝐒𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 and other members of the UA staff. 𝐒𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 welcomed him and invited him to take a seat. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 began discussing the new vigilante. President Mike expressed interest, and 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 shared the information he had gathered from 𝐻𝐼ROZU. He slid a file about the villain, Magna, across the table and Izawa began reviewing it. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 explained that they had no confirmed information about the vigilante's identity, only theories. They speculated that the vigilante was male based on the costume design and 𝐻𝐼ROZU's description of his voice. Midnight suggested that height could provide clues about age, but 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 noted that people could be shorter than expected for their age. He mentioned that the vigilante's name was Egao, which elicited an enthusiastic response from Midnight. 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 continued, explaining that 𝐻𝐼ROZU had observed the vigilante's quick movements and powerful punches, suggesting a quirk related to speed or strength. He noted that she had paid close attention to everything the vigilante said about Magna, contributing valuable information to their investigation. 𝐒𝐮𝐶 praised 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨's theories, and Izawa, rising from his seat, declared that he would catch the vigilante. Later, Izawa was perched on a roof, scanning for any signs of villains or the new vigilante. Suddenly, he heard a bank alarm ringing, indicating a robbery in progress. He rushed to the bank, only to find that the situation had already been resolved by Egao. Izawa smirked, realizing how easy it was to track the vigilante. Egao handed the bank owner back a sack filled with coins, and the man expressed his gratitude. Egao then jumped onto a roof, prompting Izawa to follow. When he landed, he was surprised to find Egao waiting for him. Egao casually asked why Izawa was following him. Izawa responded with sarcasm, suggesting he was inviting him to a tea party. Egao explained that he didn't see Izawa as a bad hero, which was rare for him, and he didn't want to fight. Izawa was taken aback by this unexpected compliment and pressed for clarification on why he was different from other heroes. Egao explained that Izawa was a hero who fought not for fame or money but out of genuine conviction. He admired Izawa's quirkless fighting style and concluded that he and his husband were real heroes. Izawa, intrigued, asked how Egao knew about his husband, but Egao only teased that it was for him to know and Izawa to find out. Egao then asked for an autograph, calling Izawa and his husband cool dudes. Izawa, taken aback, realized that Egao was a unique individual who saw heroes in a different light. Since you like real heroes, why don't you help one out so he can go back home and get some coffee? The protagonist readied their capture weapon. Egao declined the offer, insisting he wasn't interested. The protagonist asserted they weren't asking, which prompted Egao to yell back defiantly and start running. Activating their quirk, the protagonist pursued Egao as he dashed from rooftop to rooftop. Despite his speed, it wasn't his quirk. The protagonist had erased it. It seemed Egao's strength was his true asset. The protagonist accelerated and threw the capture weapon, successfully pulling Egao closer. Egao smirked, claiming he wasn't so easily caught. Just as the protagonist was about to respond, they noticed Egao had somehow escaped the capture weapon's grasp. Egao taunted the protagonist about having cat fur in their hair before running off again. The protagonist shook their head in disbelief and resumed the chase, while Egao continued to mock them. In a moment of determination, the protagonist tackled Egao down an alleyway, resulting in both of them tumbling to the ground. The protagonist landed on the pavement, while Egao ended up in a trash dumpster. Hearing rustling from inside the dumpster, the protagonist cautiously approached, ready for an attack. Instead, Egao leaped out, exclaiming that the protagonist looked better in pink and threw a glitter bomb, covering them in sparkles. Realizing Egao had already escaped, the protagonist groaned in frustration. Upon returning home, the protagonist was greeted by their husband Hisashi, who burst into laughter at the sight of the glitter-covered hero. Their son Hitoshi entered the room, only to find himself in a fit of giggles at the same sight. The protagonist, feeling annoyed, accepted a towel from Hitoshi to wipe off the glitter. Hisashi handed the protagonist a cup of coffee and settled on the couch beside them, curious about the encounter with the vigilante. Unfortunately, the protagonist admitted they hadn't caught him. Hisashi inquired about the vigilante's strength, but the protagonist explained that they hadn't had a chance to truly fight. Hisashi listened intently as the protagonist shared their observations. They decided to contact 𝐻𝐿, who answered the call cheerfully. The protagonist informed 𝐻𝐿 about the vigilante, who seemed to know more than he should. 𝐻𝐿 speculated that the vigilante might be quirkless, similar to the protagonist. As the conversation continued, 𝐻𝐿 and Hisashi shared a laugh, but the protagonist grew increasingly frustrated. They recounted how Egao had escaped their capture scarf with ease and even thrown pink glitter at them. 𝐻𝐿 found the situation amusing, while Hisashi struggled to contain his laughter. The protagonist sighed, feeling exasperated by the entire ordeal. Hitoshi approached with mugs in hand, offering coffee to the protagonist and hot cocoa to Hisashi. The protagonist expressed gratitude and acknowledged Egao as a troublemaker. Hitoshi teased that the protagonist didn't look bad in pink, prompting a sarcastic response. The next day, a 12-year-old Izuku woke up, bursting into laughter as memories of the previous night flooded back. He felt hyper from the sugary snacks he had consumed. The excitement of meeting Eraserhead and throwing glitter at him made him giddy. As he rolled on the floor laughing, his parents entered the room, looking confused. His father scolded him for waking him up, while his mother expressed concern. After a brief exchange, Izuku walked into the bathroom and looked at his reflection in the mirror. He noticed blood dripping from his head, with scars and cuts visible on his arms and legs. Old burns and injuries marked his body, reminders of his past struggles. Some of the scars on Izuku's body were from Hisashi and some were from Bakugo. However, they weren't the sole cause of his pain. Izuku sighed as he washed the remnants of blood from his head, watching the red liquid swirl down the bathroom sink. At 12 years old, he felt overwhelmed by the weight of his circumstances. He wondered why everything had to be this way. If only he had been born with a quirk, perhaps they could have been a happy family, a normal one, at least. His mother was suffering because of him, and he slammed his fist against the sink counter, feeling the guilt wash over him. It was all his fault. As he stepped out of the bathroom, he was met by his mother, who looked frantic. She demanded to know how much he had endured this time. Izuku replied that it was the usual amount, but she insisted he should show her before cleaning up. He reassured her that it wasn't too painful, but when she touched his forehead, he winced and moved her hand away. Her eyes filled with tears as she promised to find a way to get him out of this situation. He tried to comfort her, telling her she was doing her best and that there was no need for pressure. She lamented about what she had done to deserve a son like him, and he vowed silently that he would find a way to help her someday. Meanwhile, Hisashi was in the bathroom, washing his hands of the remnants of Izuku's injuries. He stepped out and answered a call from a man in his contacts. The man's deep voice demanded to know where he was, reminding him he was late. Hisashi groaned, explaining that he had overslept and gotten busy. The man warned him not to let it happen again, or there would be consequences. Egao had been a vigilante for about a year and had recently turned 13. Eraserhead had yet to catch him, and he could sense the frustration building in the hero. During his patrol, he was jumping from rooftop to rooftop, scanning the alleys for any signs of trouble. His attention was drawn to a small girl running through an alleyway, her long curly hair a mix of blue and gray. Her large red eyes were filled with fear and panic, and he noticed a small horn protruding from her forehead. She appeared to be around 5 to 7 years old. The girl dashed out of the alley and collided with a civilian. The man knelt down to help her, and Egao observed cautiously as he noticed the bandages wrapped around her arms and legs. The girl was trembling, looking around as if expecting something terrible to happen. She stammered through tears, expressing her fear of going back. The man continued to comfort her, asking if she was lost or separated from her parents, but she only cried and repeated her plea. Just as the man was about to call for help, another figure emerged from the alley. The girl immediately broke down, shaking and hyperventilating, her grip on the man's shirt tightening in terror. The newcomer had short brown hair and golden eyes, wearing a jacket adorned with purple feathers and a bird-like mask. Egao felt a dark aura emanating from him, and it was clear the girl was terrified of this man. The masked man called out to the girl, revealing her name was Eri. The civilian, still holding Eri protectively, asked if he was her guardian. The man confirmed he was, then knelt down to her level, brushing his fingers through her hair. Eri flinched at his touch, and the civilian instinctively pulled her closer, sensing danger. The masked man introduced himself as 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, or Overhaul, and mentioned it was late and past Eri's bedtime. The girl trembled at his words, and Egao could sense the menacing intent behind them. The civilian, feeling uneasy, questioned Overhaul about the bandages on Eri's arms and legs. Overhaul dismissed it, claiming she was just a clumsy girl. The civilian refused to hand Eri over without confirmation from the authorities, and Egao watched as Overhaul's anger grew. He pulled Eri toward him, and she screamed in fear. The civilian pulled her back, and it became clear who posed a threat. Egao knew he had to intervene. Just as the protagonist was about to jump down, they paused when Overhaul did something unexpected. He released Eri and began to remove his glove. He asked Eri if she wanted someone else to suffer because of her actions. The protagonist wondered what he was planning. Eri finally spoke, her voice trembling, pleading for mercy. Overhaul then instructed her to come with him. The girl stood up and began to walk away with the man in the bird mask. However, before they could disappear into the alleyway, a civilian grabbed Eri's hand. The protagonist realized they needed to intervene. The man was just trying to help. Overhaul turned to the civilian, stating that he could not allow him to inform the heroes about the situation. Just as he began to shout, Overhaul pulled off his glove and touched the man. The protagonist's eyes widened in horror as they witnessed the man collapse, lifeless. They covered their mouth, trying to suppress a scream. Eri fell to her knees, sobbing and clutching her shirt, begging for the man to be brought back, insisting it was her fault. Overhaul, with a fierce glare, declared that this was her punishment for trying to escape. Eri promised she would never attempt to escape again, but Overhaul simply stated he would ensure that. The protagonist remained frozen, tears streaming down from beneath their mask, shaking uncontrollably and on the verge of a panic attack. Eraserhead's capture weapons wrapped around them as he jumped onto the roof. He quickly noticed their distress and sighed, releasing the capture weapon before sitting beside them. He rubbed their back, bringing them back to reality. The protagonist whispered Eraserhead's name, and he asked what had happened. The protagonist explained the situation, detailing how Eri had appeared distressed and how the civilian had tried to help her. They described Overhaul as a villain who claimed to be Eri's father and how he had killed the man for trying to protect her. The protagonist felt a deep sense of regret for not intervening sooner. A heavy silence fell between them after the explanation. Eraserhead then asked if this was the first death the protagonist had witnessed. They confirmed it slowly, and he sighed, acknowledging their reaction. He decided to let them go for the day due to the trauma they had experienced, but warned that next time he would catch them for good. He mentioned he would inform the authorities to investigate the alley and assured the protagonist that he and the heroes would rescue Eri from her dire situation. After Eraserhead left, the protagonists stood up and looked back at the scene, clenching their fists and gritting their teeth, vowing to save Eri from Overhaul. Meanwhile, Izuku was in his nearly empty bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his laptop. He heard a knock at the door and recognized it as his mother. She entered, looking around his room with a hand over her mouth, as if she were about to cry. Concerned, Izuku asked what was wrong. She reassured him that it was nothing but asked him to clean his room because she had invited Mr. Flick over again. Izuku was surprised by the familiarity of the name but agreed to tidy up. His mother mentioned she was making cookies and invited him to join her. Excited, he quickly finished cleaning and returned to his laptop, where he watched a video of a meeting among pro heroes discussing plans to save Eri and capture Overhaul. After watching it multiple times, he decided it was enough and shut his laptop when his mother called him to help with the cookies. An hour later, the doorbell rang, and Izuku rushed to open it, greeting Mr. Flick with a smile. Mr. Flick announced he had brought P&D cake, and they all laughed. Izuku stepped aside to let him in, and the two sat on the couch while Izuku joined in their conversation. When the oven timer went off, he quickly retrieved the tray of cookies and placed them on the table, noticing Mr. Flick's eager expression. They shared a laugh at his reaction, and Izuku felt a sense of warmth in the moment. He handed one to him, expressing gratitude before taking a bite and sinking into the couch, while laughter filled the room. He remarked on how delicious they were, prompting a smile. Then he suggested they take some P&D cake, gesturing towards it. The three of them enjoyed their food and conversation for about an hour until Mr. Flick had to leave. After he departed, the protagonist hurried back to his room, pulling his laptop closer. He sifted through UA files, searching for any useful information for the battle against Overhaul. He clicked on the file titled 𝐶𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, but found nothing new. It seemed he had all the information he needed for the fight ahead. Later that night, at 8:45, he prepared himself, donning his vigilante suit. This was the time the pros had chosen to attack, the moment Overhaul would be defeated, and Eri would be saved. He leaped out of his window and landed on a rooftop, feeling the wind WHP around him. He spotted several pro heroes leaping from building to building, his gaze settling on Eraserhead, Present Mic, and All Might. He reassured himself that he wouldn't let them interfere with his main mission, saving Eri. Unbeknownst to them, he trailed behind, maintaining a safe distance. They soon arrived at a large building, where the pros began discussing an ambush plan. He listened intently from the sidelines, noting that the police were collaborating with them. The strategy exceeded his expectations. They might actually stand a chance. Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see the pro hero Ryukyu in her dragon form, having been struck down. A large man with a bird mask lay unconscious nearby, recognized as Rikiya Katsukame, a member of the 𝐻𝐼𝐾𝐾. It appeared All Might had taken him down. Fat Gum called out to Ryukyu, who assured him she was fine, laughing lightly. The heroes and police officers rushed into the building, and he followed closely behind, surprised they hadn't noticed him yet. However, he remembered his true purpose. He wasn't there to defeat Overhaul. The heroes could handle that. He was there to save Eri. He veered away from the heroes, running toward the doors they had passed. He checked each room, but Eri was nowhere to be found. After several unsuccessful attempts, he realized his mistake. Of course, they would hide her deeper in the building. He sprinted in the direction the heroes had gone, hoping to catch up. As he arrived, he saw the heroes engaged in battle with more villains. He stayed hidden, observing as the villains were easily defeated. However, he noticed some unfamiliar villains wearing black masks with a white X. While he recognized the 𝐶𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, these new villains were a mystery. They seemed to be concealing their quirks, which made him uneasy. Determined to stay focused on his mission, he began to sneak past them but felt a pair of eyes on him. Turning slowly, he found Night Eye staring directly at him. Panic surged through him, but to his surprise, Night Eye nodded, gesturing for him to proceed. Confusion washed over him as he realized Night Eye was allowing him to join the mission, perhaps aware of his intentions. He nodded back, giving a thumbs up before dashing off, unaware he was being followed by All Might. As he moved forward, he encountered a stern voice urging him to leave. The figure, All Might, insisted he should let the professionals handle it. He stood firm, stating he wouldn't leave without Eri. Eraserhead reassured him they would save her, but he argued that they would be too occupied with Overhaul and the 𝐻𝐼𝐾𝐾. He expressed his concern for Eri's safety, knowing she might feel compelled to return to Overhaul amidst the chaos. After a tense moment, Eraserhead granted him permission to go. Without hesitation, he rushed back to the door, while All Might and Eraserhead returned to the fight. He twisted the doorknob only to find it locked. This door felt different. It had to be the one. He retrieved lockpicks from his utility belt and worked quickly to open it. As the door creaked open, he found Eri trembling beneath her blanket. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him, and sat beside her. She jumped at his voice, startled by his sudden presence. He gently asked if her name was Eri, and she nodded slowly, confusion evident on her face. He smiled reassuringly from beneath his mask, introducing himself as Egao. Noticing her continued shaking, he inquired if his mask frightened her. She quietly assured him it didn't, which brought him a sense of relief. I didn't want to take my mask off. As I moved closer to her, I asked why she was scared. She hesitated, pulling the blanket up again, and asked if I would hurt her. My heart sank. She thought I would harm her. All we knew was that Overhaul was using her to make drags, but who knew what else she had endured? I gently removed the blanket and wrapped my arms around her, assuring her that I would never hurt her. I promised that I wouldn't let anyone hurt her again and that I would get her out of there. I noticed she was still trembling, fear evident in her eyes. After everything she had been through, no one could blame her for being scared. I knelt down to her level and reached into my pocket, pulling out a small item. She shut her eyes tightly, bracing for a blow. I placed the item on her shirt, and when she looked down, her big round eyes widened in surprise. It was a smiley sticker. I asked if she liked it, and she touched it, a small smile forming on her lips as she thanked me. I then asked if she wanted to get out of there, and she nodded slowly. I lifted her up and kicked the door down, rushing out of the building. I wanted to avoid any confrontation with villains or heroes. Once outside, I climbed onto a roof with Eri in my arms. I glanced back at her, relieved to see her tears were happy ones. She thanked me and I smiled back. Looking down, I saw Overhaul defeated, with All Might standing triumphantly over him. Heroes surrounded them, while police officers were handcuffing the 𝐻𝐼𝐾𝐻 members. I jumped down from the roof and approached Eraserhead, Present Mic, All Might, and the other pros. Most of them took a defensive stance, and Eri tightened her grip on me, sensing their glares. I reassured her that everything was okay and firmly told the heroes that they were making her scared. They sighed in defeat, but the police officers still had their guns pointed at me. With a child in my arms, I felt the tension rise. Tsukachi ordered the officers to lower their weapons, and they complied, though still cautious. I handed Eri over to Eraserhead and Mike. She jumped down and hugged my legs, crying that she didn't want to go. I comforted her, telling her they were good people. I looked up at Eraserhead, asking him to take care of her. He hesitated, surprised by my request, but Mike eagerly picked her up, insisting that 2 kids weren't too much trouble. Eraserhead sighed in defeat, and I prepared to leave, waving at Eri as I ran toward a nearby light pole to jump onto a higher roof. Just as I was about to leap, a bullet struck my leg, causing me to fall to the ground with a gasp of pain. A small puddle of blood formed around my leg as I curled up, gripping the injury tightly. I could hear the pros rushing toward me. Eraserhead yelled my name, and Ryukyu examined my leg, noting the severity of the wound. The tension escalated as they discussed who had shot me. I felt a wave of pain unlike anything I had experienced before, and Fatgum, noticing my distress, suggested we hurry to get me treatment. They decided to take me to UA, where Recovery Girl could heal me. Panic surged through me at the thought of revealing my identity. As we made our way back, Tsukachi confronted a police officer, demanding to know what had happened. The officer stammered, and Tsukachi's anger intensified when he realized the officer had shot me. Eri, still crying, clung to a female officer, who tried to comfort her. The situation escalated as Mike shouted at the officer, demanding to know why he had fired his weapon. The officer finally revealed that he had acted out of rage, claiming I had killed his wife. The tension in the air was palpable, and the pros exchanged worried glances, knowing that this incident would have serious consequences. He had devised a plan to eliminate their target, smirking as he spoke. Turning to the back, he noticed a teenage girl playing with a knife. He informed her that they would be using her quirk, prompting her to squeal with excitement and jump up and down, her crazed smile lighting up her face. In the present, the heroes listened intently to the police officer's account while Tsukachi utilized his lie detector quirk. The officer recounted his harrowing experience of returning home from grocery shopping, only to find his wife lifeless on the floor. He described how the suspect had been holding a knife and laughing maniacally before escaping through the window. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke. After witnessing Egao's recent actions, saving Eri, many found it hard to believe the officer's story, especially Eraserhead and Present Mike, who were convinced Egao was not a bad person. Aizawa stiffened at the officer's words, and the pros turned to Tsukachi, seeking answers. The detective's expression was one of horror, as if he had just seen a ghost. Tsukachi finally spoke, confirming the officer's truthfulness. Aizawa and Yamada's eyes widened in disbelief. Many pros began to shift their loyalties, losing trust in Egao almost immediately. Aizawa protested vehemently, insisting Egao would never commit such an act. Suddenly, the pros' attention was drawn to Fat Gum, who exclaimed in shock that Egao had vanished from his grasp. He had thought Egao was unconscious, only to find himself struck from below the chin. A police officer shouted for everyone to search the area for Egao, but Tsukachi, visibly annoyed, questioned the officer's authority. The officer quickly corrected himself, instructing everyone to remain in position. He then asked if they were not going to apprehend the suspect. Aizawa interjected, asserting that Egao was not a villain. The officer, still distraught, reminded them that Egao was accused of killing his wife. Tsukachi remained silent, contemplating the situation. He looked back at the group of police officers awaiting orders and sighed, instructing them to search for Egao. The officers dispersed, scouring the area for the vigilante. Aizawa, torn between rage and confusion, attempted to speak, but Tsukachi interrupted, suggesting they bring Egao in for questioning. Aizawa grumbled, sinking his face into his scarf, reluctantly agreeing. The police and a few pros searched the nearby areas for half an hour, eventually regrouping in front of the destroyed Hasaikai base. Ryukyu reported that she had not found Egao, and it became clear that he had already returned home. Meanwhile, Izuku lay on the floor, clutching his leg and biting his hand in pain. He couldn't go to the hospital. A child showing up with a gunshot wound on the same day a vigilante was being framed for murder would raise too many questions. After some time, he decided to limp to the hospital. A man noticed his condition and rushed to help, offering to drive him, but Izuku wisely declined, knowing better than to accept a ride from a stranger. Instead, the man called an ambulance. At the hospital, a nurse approached Izuku, clipboard in hand, ready to take notes. As he sat on the hospital bed, she began to bandage his foot and address his other minor injuries, including a broken bone in his left arm and a bruise on his cheek. When she asked him what had happened, Izuku nervously explained that he had been shot by someone. The nurse tilted her head, sensing his uncertainty. After finishing his bandaging, she returned with a pair of crutches and asked if he needed them. Izuku smiled gratefully, assuring her he would be fine as he slowly got up, using the bed for support. He bowed and thanked her for her care, causing her to blush slightly in embarrassment. As he walked through the hospital halls, Izuku reflected on the earlier events. He was adamant that he had not killed the officer's wife. He would never harm anyone. Despite Tsukachi's assertion that the officer was telling the truth, Izuku felt it was unjust. The stress weighed heavily on him, and he longed to release it, but he knew he had to face his father upon returning home. Realizing he was late and that his mother would be worried, he retrieved his yellow bag from the waiting room, which contained his vigilante suit. He put it on and adjusted his breaths, which had been rolled up for bandaging. Sighing, he knew he needed to hurry home. Outside, the wind brushed through his hair as he made his way to the nearest bus stop, sitting on the bench and losing himself in thought. His reverie was interrupted by a news report blaring from a large screen on a nearby building. The reporter announced that a group of pro-heroes, the police force, and the vigilante Egao had defeated the Hasaikai group and their leader, Overhaul. The pros had rescued a young girl named Eri, who had been exploited for her quirk. However, the report took a dark turn, revealing that Egao was wanted for murder, with Officer Tsubasa claiming to have found his wife dead, with Egao standing over her, holding a bloody dagger. After Tsukachi, the detective and an important part of the police force, used his lie-detecting quirk, it was confirmed by All Might that Tsukachi's quirk detected Officer Tsubasa's story as true. Egao was now officially a wanted criminal and villain. The announcement urged anyone who saw him to alert the pros or authorities. The weight of those words sank into me, and my world felt like it had come to a halt. I was a wanted criminal, and no one would believe in my innocence. 𝗀𝐿 looked at Izawa, who was explaining about Eri, the girl who had been experimented on by Overhaul. Izawa was interrupted by Yamada, who excitedly declared that Eri was 𝗀𝐿's new sister. In disbelief, 𝗀𝐿 approached Eri, who was sitting on the couch, watching whatever their dads were viewing. He sat beside her and opened a box of Oreos, holding one up to her. Eri tilted her head in confusion, asking what it was. He explained that it was an Oreo cookie and offered her one. She quietly thanked him before taking a small nibble. Mike exclaimed how adorable Eri was, and the purple-haired boy agreed, rubbing the back of his neck. All attention shifted from the TV as the three males began to converse, while Eri remained focused on the screen. Eri, who had been quiet, suddenly expressed her fear and shock at seeing Mr. Smile on the television. Hitoshi, noticing her reaction, questioned what was happening. He had never liked Egao, suspecting trouble. Eri defended Mr. Smile, surprising everyone. Izawa acknowledged her feelings but insisted they still needed to catch him for answers. Hisashi suggested Eri put on her shoes, as Nemuri was coming to take her shopping. Eri asked who Muneri was, mispronouncing the pro-hero's name. Hitoshi stifled a laugh, while Hisashi chuckled and pointed out the rhyme in her words, causing Hitoshi to jump. Izawa scolded Hisashi for being too loud, and Yamada joined in, raising his voice. Eri laughed at the playful banter between the adults, but Hitoshi quickly covered her ears, reminding them that she was present. He urged them to refrain from cursing and fighting in front of her. Eri, curious, asked what a certain word meant, leaving the three males stunned. Hisashi fainted, and Eri looked on, confused by their reactions. Izawa explained that it was a bad word and that she shouldn't say it, but Eri pointed out that he had just said it himself. Hitoshi face-bombed, while Izawa mumbled about his struggles with children. Just then, Nemuri burst into the room, her excitement palpable as she spotted Eri. Without waiting for an explanation, she lifted Eri onto her shoulders and rushed out of the house. Izawa sighed, almost expecting this, while Hitoshi expressed concern that Eri might be traumatized by the sudden encounter. Izawa raised an eyebrow at Hitoshi's comment, questioning how that could happen. Hitoshi sarcastically pointed out that being grabbed by a stranger could be alarming. He also noted that night was approaching, prompting Izawa to slump into the couch, assuring himself that Eri would be fine. Meanwhile, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 was in shock after hearing the news report about Egao being labeled a wanted criminal. He refused to believe that the kid could be a villain or a criminal. Pulling out his phone, he attempted to call Izuku, but he didn't answer. After several tries, Izuku finally picked up, his voice shaky. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 expressed his concern, asking if Izuku was okay. Izuku reassured him that he was fine, but 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 could tell he was crying. He invited Izuku to come talk to him at the shop, but Izuku hesitated, not wanting to be a bother. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 playfully threatened to drag him over, insisting that he come. He then questioned why Izuku was at the bus stop near the hospital, realizing he could see his location through the phone. He needed to turn that thing off. He thought about it, but he also knew that in case of danger, he could be found easily. He sighed and asked why Izuku was by the hospital. Izuku hesitated, saying it was nothing, just a small bruise. He could tell Izuku was lying. He insisted he would pick him up. Izuku protested, but the call ended before he could argue further. He didn't want to hang up on Izuku, but he couldn't let him walk home with an injury. When he arrived, he was shocked to see bandages wrapped all over Izuku's leg. He exclaimed about the broken arm, and Izuku downplayed it, saying it wasn't that bad and that he had broken it on purpose. He couldn't believe how reckless Izuku was. He sighed, looking Izuku over, and decided to help him. As he lifted Izuku, the boy shrieked in surprise, asking what he was doing. He explained that Izuku couldn't walk to the parking lot like that. He paused, realizing how light Izuku felt. Concerned, he asked if he was eating properly. Izuku mumbled that he was just a bit picky, but he could tell he was lying. He continued, trying to change the subject, but Izuku interrupted him, his head hanging low. He had seen the news and was clearly upset. He reassured Izuku that he didn't believe the reports and knew he wouldn't do such a thing. Izuku's eyes watered, and he thanked him with a small smile. The unexpected affection made him feel good. Suddenly, there was banging at the shop door. He sighed, getting up to check. After a moment, he rushed back to Izuku, urging him to hide in the closet. Izuku asked if everything was okay, but he insisted he needed to hide. Before Izuku could protest further, he quickly shoved him into the closet and locked it just as the glass door shattered. He ran to the couch, where he had hidden a weapon. Footsteps approached, and he pointed the weapon at the figures entering. One of them, a black-haired man, spoke calmly, saying they were just there to talk. He recognized the heroes, Eraserhead, Present Mic, All Might, and others. He glared at them, demanding to know what they wanted. Aizawa spoke cautiously, stating they were there to discuss the costume designs of a certain villain. Izuku remained hidden, listening closely, realizing he couldn't escape the closet. They questioned him about the costume he had made for Egao, the villain in question. Flick, still holding the weapon, casually pulled out a lunchbox, causing the heroes to tense up, expecting a weapon. Instead, he revealed a sandwich and took a bite, asking if they were just going to talk about costumes all day. The heroes were taken aback by his nonchalance. All Might attempted to steer the conversation back to the serious matter at hand, but Flick interrupted him with a loud burp, apologizing with a smile. He offered them a bite of his sandwich, which earned him a smack on the head from Ryukyu for his antics. All Might pressed on, insisting they needed to know Egao's true identity, as he had been labeled a villain. Flick questioned why they thought he would know. Aizawa pointed out that he often knew his customers' identities and that Egao had been seen around the area frequently. Flick smirked, challenging them to explain why he should share that information. All Might insisted they had to know for the safety of the people, emphasizing Egao's danger. Flick thought about how ridiculous it was for them to threaten a civilian like him. Aizawa reiterated the seriousness of the situation, stating they needed to capture Egao. Izuku listened in shock, feeling betrayed. One of the only heroes he trusted was doubting him. He had seen Aizawa as a father figure, and hearing those words hurt deeply. He fought back tears, whispering to himself about how even Aizawa had turned against him. Flick shot Aizawa a glare, recalling the moments that had built their bond, the admiration and respect he had shown. Eraserhead thought about the situation, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal as he clenched his fists. He questioned whether everything he believed was just an act. He demanded to know the identity of the mysterious figure, his voice filled with urgency. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, holding a gun tightly, responded defiantly, refusing to reveal anything. All Might, serious and stern, insisted on getting answers. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 retorted, reminding them of the importance of his work in creating hero costumes and pointed out their illegal entry into his shop. Frustrated, All Might muttered under his breath, while Ryukyu suggested they leave, acknowledging that they were getting nowhere with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. The heroes exited, leaving 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 to sigh in exhaustion as he rushed to a closet, unlocking it and opening the door. Inside, Izuku was curled up, quietly crying, feeling disillusioned by the heroes he once admired, especially Eraserhead. He expressed his disappointment, believing Eraserhead was just like the others. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 sat beside him, offering comfort and reassurance. Later, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 spoke on the phone with Inko, Izuku's mother, informing her that her son was safe. Izuku, in the bathroom changing into fresh clothes, hurriedly assured 𝐀𝐮𝐿 he would be ready soon. Once dressed, he took the phone from 𝐀𝐮𝐿, hearing his mother's worried voice. Inko expressed her concern over the injuries he sustained, her tone filled with maternal anxiety. Izuku tried to downplay his injuries, but Inko's reaction only intensified, highlighting her fears for her son's safety. Embarrassed, Izuku attempted to end the conversation quickly, panicking when he accidentally hung up on her. 𝐀𝐮𝐿, noticing Izuku's distress, promised to explain the situation to Inko, easing the boy's worries. He directed Izuku to the guest room, reminding him of the layout of the apartment. Grateful, Izuku thanked him before heading off to bed. The following night, Aizawa was on patrol, searching for any signs of crime, particularly focusing on Egao. He felt a sense of urgency, needing to understand the truth behind the Vigilante's actions. Suddenly he heard screams from an alleyway, which abruptly stopped. Alarmed, he rushed towards the sound, only to find Egao standing over a fallen man, a knife in his hand. Aizawa's heart sank as he confronted the vigilante, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. Egao acknowledged Aizawa, revealing a twisted sense of satisfaction. He casually mentioned a police officer he should have dealt with, his demeanor unsettling. Aizawa, in disbelief, questioned Egao's actions, struggling to reconcile the vigilante's words with the reality he faced. Egao's laughter echoed in the alley, revealing a darker side to his character, leaving Aizawa feeling more confused and concerned than ever. As the situation escalated, Tsukachi arrived on the scene, accompanied by other pro-heroes. They began to piece together the truth behind the events, with Tsukachi questioning Egao about the murder of Officer Tsubasa's wife. Egao maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed. The tension in the air thickened as the heroes grappled with the implications of Egao's words, highlighting the fragile trust between them and the complexities of their roles as protectors. Aizawa reasoned that they could work things out. The vigilante laughed, gesturing to the body on the floor, stating that the damage was already done. All Might declared that they had no choice but to capture him. The vigilante mocked them, reminding them that they had been trying to catch him for an entire year. He offered them a chance for redemption, challenging both All Might and Aizawa. Eraserhead felt a wave of guilt wash over him, realizing that the situation had spiraled out of control since the previous day. He thought about how the vigilante had overheard them. Despite his reluctance, he knew he had to act. All Might rallied the heroes, urging them to end the conflict once and for all. As the heroes charged, the vigilante quickly assessed the situation and decided to target Midnight first, knowing her quirk could incapacitate him. She approached with a punch aimed at his stomach, but he remained unfazed. With a swift move, he slid under her legs, kicked her back, and incapacitated her with a quick tap to her neck. Present Mike watched in shock as she fell. Egao grabbed Midnight by the leg and tossed her off the roof, not intending to harm her but to create a distraction. As expected, Ryukyu transformed and dove to catch her, leaving only 3 heroes in the fight: Present Mike, All Might, and Eraserhead. However, with Midnight out of the equation, it felt like only 2 remained. While Egao focused on the remaining heroes, Present Mike, upset about his friend's fate, attempted to sneak up on him. Egao anticipated his move, leaping over him and pushing him forward, causing Mike to stumble. He realized that this confrontation was taking longer than planned and needed to end it swiftly. Egao tackled Mike and swiftly got to his feet, grabbing Mick's leg and slamming him down. Mike gasped, feeling a sharp pain in his back as he turned to see the 2 heroes still standing and Tsukachi observing from the sidelines. Egao noted that there were no more heroes left to stand in his way. As screams echoed from a nearby family, All Might rushed to help them, while Egao taunted Aizawa about his inability to act. Aizawa was filled with fear, guilt, and regret for what had transpired. He realized that Egao had taken down 2 pro-heroes and devised a strategy to avoid a fight with the remaining 2. Egao laughed at Aizawa's attempts to reconcile, questioning whether he truly wanted to make amends after everything that had happened. Aizawa, determined, took a fighting stance, but Egao remained relaxed, hands in his pockets. When Aizawa threw a punch, Egao didn't flinch, knowing it wouldn't land. He chuckled, commenting on Aizawa's perceived weakness. As Aizawa cautiously approached, he expressed disappointment in Egao, who took a step back, edging closer to the roof's edge. In a moment of panic, Aizawa lunged to catch him, but it was too late. Egao landed safely on a light pole below, leaving Aizawa feeling a mix of relief and guilt. All Might returned to the roof, searching for the vigilante, but Egao had already vanished. Aizawa's head hung low as he acknowledged their failure to capture him, while All Might expressed frustration. Meanwhile, Egao made his way to an apartment, slipping in through the window. He removed his costume, revealing himself as Izuku Midoriya, a green-haired boy with emerald eyes and freckles. Sitting on the floor, he stared at the mask in his hands, filled with anger and frustration. Despite his victory over the heroes, he felt trapped, screaming for help behind the mask. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Hisashi entered, demanding to know where Inko was. Izuku stammered that he didn't know, but Hisashi accused him of hiding her. In a fit of rage, he struck Izuku, who fell to the ground, terrified of what would come next. Izuku pleaded for the truth, but Hisashi continued to yell, pushing him to the edge. In a moment of desperation, Izuku shouted that villains had kidnapped her, escalating the tension in the room. A day ago at Mr. Flick's house, Izuku approached 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and tapped him on the shoulder. The man flinched and turned around, startled by the sudden contact from the boy. Izuku tilted his head, confused by 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's jumpy demeanor. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 sighed. Realizing it was only Izuku, Izuku asked, concerned, if something was wrong, having heard yelling. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 explained that he had just been on the phone with Izuku's mother and thought something might have happened. Izuku's eyes widened at the thought of his mother being in trouble, and he exclaimed in alarm, wanting to know what had happened. A few minutes earlier, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 had been on the phone with 𝗀𝐻𝐭, who expressed her gratitude for his help with Izuku. Suddenly, her voice was interrupted by screams and chaos on the other end of the line. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's heart raced as he heard the sounds of civilians panicking and crashing noises, followed by laughter. A raspy male voice taunted, and a female voice squealed in delight. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's fear grew as he yelled for 𝗀𝐻𝐭, but all he could hear were the disturbing sounds of distress. Izuku, overwhelmed by the news, pulled at his hair in despair, repeating that it couldn't be true. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 urged him to calm down, but Izuku fell to his knees, his breathing quickening. Realizing Izuku was having a panic attack, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 knelt beside him, wrapping his arms around the smaller boy and gently rubbing his back while making soothing sounds. Izuku kept repeating that his mother was gone, but 𝐀𝐮𝐴 reassured him that she might have been taken as a hostage. They needed to figure out who had taken her instead of wasting time in despair. Izuku wiped his eyes and stood up, determined to find answers. He ran to the guest room with 𝐀𝐮𝐿 following closely behind, and they began to work. Izuku spent an hour on his laptop, hacking into security cameras near the scene of 𝗀𝐻𝐭's kidnapping. 𝐀𝐮𝐿 sat beside him, pointing out details and offering P&D cake, which Izuku declined. Izuku identified the villains as the same ones who had aided Overhaul, noting their distinctive masks with an X on them. He expressed his frustration at not being able to locate their base when suddenly he spotted something alarming on the screen. 𝐀𝐮𝐿, shocked, dropped the plate of P&D cake as they both stared at the villains who had kidnapped 𝗀𝐻𝐭. The group of villains walked into an alleyway where they met a man shrouded in purple mist. Izuku whispered that it might be the man's quirk. As the villains began to walk through a warp gate, one remained behind. Izuku realized this villain might have a mission and decided to confront him to learn the location of their base. 𝐀𝐮𝐿 encouraged Izuku's plan, and Izuku quickly donned his costume, promising to return soon. Meanwhile, the villain named Egao was struggling to follow directions from another villain, who seemed confused. Izuku felt annoyed by the villain's disorganization. Egao knocked on the door of an abandoned-looking building, which turned out to be a bar. When the door opened, a villain wearing the same X mask flinched at the sight of Egao holding one of his team members. The villain was skeptical but allowed them inside. As they entered, another villain rushed forward, excited to see Egao and eager to know his identity. Izuku cringed at the disturbing enthusiasm for violence and BLD. He ignored the masked girl and focused on the leader, whom he assumed was Facepalm, demanding to know where his mother was. The girl, clearly unhinged, taunted Izuku about having fun with 𝗀𝐻𝐭. Izuku froze, realizing the danger his mother was in. He shouted again for answers, and Facepalm smirked, noting Izuku's shift in demeanor. He suggested that Izuku's reaction indicated a close relationship with the woman. Izuku firmly stated that he was simply worried for her safety, to which Facepalm responded that if Izuku wanted to save her, he would need to do something for them. Izuku felt anger rise within him as he asked what they wanted. Facepalm's request shocked Izuku. They wanted him to pretend to be a villain. Izuku's expression shifted to one of disbelief and annoyance as he processed their demand. He composed himself and firmly rejected the idea, making it clear he would never join them. Burnt Flesh, another villain, clarified that they only needed him to act as a villain to divert attention away from their activities. Izuku realized the implications of their plan. If he pretended to be a villain, the public and heroes would see him as one, making it easier for the villains to eliminate him as a threat. "That's why you must want me to do this," Izuku thought as he pieced the words together. He heard a voice mumble that he was smarter than he looked, followed by laughter suggesting he was dumber than he appeared. Izuku reassured them that it shouldn't be too hard. After all, they had helped him become well known. So, they had a deal. 30 minutes later, Izuku stood in front of Mr. Flick's house, sighing before knocking. The door opened, revealing 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 peeking out. He asked if Izuku had gotten his mother back, concern etched on his face. Izuku looked down, shaking his head as tears threatened to spill. He wiped his eyes and explained that he had to make a deal. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 raised an eyebrow, curious about the nature of this deal. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 was taken aback, expressing disbelief at the craziness of the situation. Izuku raised his hand to silence him, offering a small reassuring smile. He explained that it was all to save his mother and that he could sort things out with the heroes later. If he couldn't hold on any longer, he would find a way to tell them that what he was doing was just an act to save a civilian. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 remained silent for a moment before sighing, knowing that once Izuku made up his mind, there was no changing it. He worried about Izuku getting hurt, to which Izuku responded with a blank stare, questioning 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's seriousness. Presently, Flick walked to the park to meet Eraserhead. He spotted the sleep-deprived hero lying awkwardly on a bench and mentally face-bombed. He thought about how he wouldn't let Izuku get hurt anymore. He approached the pro hero and tapped him, waking him up. Aizawa sat up and moved aside for 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, asking what he wanted to discuss. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 began to explain the situation regarding Egao. Aizawa's eyes widened in disbelief as he realized it was all an act and that Izuku wasn't a villain. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 clarified that Izuku had chosen this path out of necessity. Aizawa sighed, commenting on how Izuku always found himself in trouble. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 reacted with frustration, questioning Aizawa's choice of words. Aizawa inquired about the woman who had been taken, and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He claimed she was just a random lady, sweat forming on his forehead. Aizawa pressed on, recalling their encounter with Egao the previous night, where they believed he had killed someone. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 explained that it was a trick involving a villain's quirk that created copies. The dead body was merely a clone, and the same went for the family that had been hurt. Aizawa absorbed this information, stating he would inform the other heroes and ensure the woman was rescued. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 urged him to take action, knowing there was more to do. 6 hours later, Aizawa searched the area, jumping from roof to roof, muttering about Izuku's whereabouts. Izuku hid in an alley, aware that Aizawa was looking for him and wanting to avoid confrontation. Aizawa called out, claiming he could see Izuku. When Aizawa approached, he revealed that he knew everything. Izuku took a fighting stance, questioning what that meant. Aizawa reassured him that he just wanted to help save the lady. Izuku realized he should have been more forthcoming and mumbled that it was no big deal now that Aizawa knew. Aizawa informed him that he had already alerted the other heroes, and they would save the lady the following night. Izuku decided to leave, but Aizawa grabbed his hand, trying to speak. Izuku pulled away, expressing his frustration before running off, leaving Aizawa alone in the alley. Izuku felt conflicted. He didn't want to fight Aizawa, but he was still upset. Despite knowing Izuku for a year, Aizawa had such sides, leaving Izuku questioning if he had ever gained Aizawa's trust or if he was just seen as a troublemaking vigilante. As he prepared to leave, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced back at Aizawa before pulling it out, staring in shock at the screen. A small voice on the other end asked if it was Izuku. He recognized his mother's voice and quickly asked if she was okay. Inko, on the other hand, was confused, thinking a man had taken her son. She demanded to know who was on the line, threatening to call the police if anything had happened to Izuku. Realizing he couldn't speak normally with his voice changer mask on, Izuku looked at Aizawa, who nodded in understanding. Izuku ran out of the alleyway and jumped into another one a bit further along. He took off his mask, sweating, and spoke into the phone, breathless. His mother, Inko, sounded concerned as she exclaimed his name. He reassured her not to worry about him, pointing out that she was the one who had been taken. Inko explained that she was okay, having regained consciousness on the couch after being unconscious for a while. Izuku was shocked and pressed her for details about the man who had her phone. Inko clarified that it was just her son's night voice, which puzzled him. He awkwardly mentioned he had gone out for some fresh air, but quickly shifted the focus back to her well-being, asking if she had been hurt. 𝐻𝐿 described a girl who had given her a few cuts, noting that the girl had a fascination with BLD and wore a school uniform, with blonde hair styled in 2 buns and golden yellowish eyes. She urged Izuku to stay away from anyone who looked like that. Izuku nodded, realizing she couldn't see him, and promised to be cautious. He then thought about how this girl must be the BLD-obsessed villain he had encountered before. This information could be valuable for the professionals working to catch the villains. He planned to inform Eraserhead that his mother was safe, hoping he was still nearby. Izuku told his mother he would be home in 15 minutes, and she encouraged him to hurry back. He expressed his love for her, and she returned the sentiment before he hung up and ran back to the alley where Aizawa was. Upon reaching the roof, Izuku found Aizawa sitting there. He hesitated before joining him in silence, knowing he had important information to share. Breaking the quiet, he relayed details about the villains who had taken the lady. He described the teenage girl who was part of their group, emphasizing her obsession with BLD and her weapon of choice, knives. He warned Aizawa to be careful if they ever encountered her. Aizawa acknowledged the usefulness of the information, thanking Izuku for it. The atmosphere grew heavy with silence again, and Aizawa attempted to start a conversation, but Izuku interrupted, stating he had to leave. He got up and departed, leaving Aizawa alone on the roof, who sighed in regret. Later, Izuku jumped into his room from the window and quickly changed into regular clothes. He rushed out to hug 𝐻𝐿, who smiled and embraced him back. They held each other for a few moments until Izuku pulled away, tears in his eyes as he expressed his fear of losing her. 𝐻𝐿 comforted him, promising to be more careful in the future. Curious about his father, Izuku asked if he was back, but 𝐻𝐿 replied that he was always busy. Izuku mumbled that it was somewhat of a good thing, and 𝐻𝐿 nodded in agreement. She then noticed the time and reminded him that it was late, suggesting they should have been in bed by now. Izuku acknowledged that he usually patrolled at that hour but understood her concern. He decided to head to bed, bidding his mother good night, and she returned the sentiment with warmth. The next day, 𝐻𝐿 knocked on Izuku's door, waking him for school. He groaned but eventually got up, grabbing his laptop from under the side table. As he joined the Zoom meeting, he saw his classmates and teacher appear on the screen. Though none were his close friends, they didn't bully him, allowing him to remain in his own space. The teacher announced a new student and emphasized the importance of treating her kindly. The new girl excitedly introduced herself, expressing her hope to make friends. Positive comments flooded the chat, with students welcoming her enthusiastically. When the teacher asked her to turn on her camera, the girl complied, revealing her face to the class. Again, many sweet and supportive comments filled the chat section. A girl unmuted her mic and complimented the new girl, saying she was pretty. The new girl smiled and introduced herself as Toga Himiko. The teacher announced that they would be going on a field trip to the museum next week and reminded everyone to turn in their permission forms. Izuku felt uneasy about attending, especially with Toga now in his class. He mumbled that he might pretend to be sick, but his mother, 𝐻𝐿, insisted that he needed to make friends and enjoy the trip. On the day of the field trip, 𝐻𝐿 rushed Izuku to get ready. Despite his reluctance, he complied, and soon they were at the museum with his classmates. As they toured the exhibits, Izuku was surprised that 𝐻𝐿 hadn't noticed Toga. When lunch was served, Izuku realized he had left his lunch bag at the entrance and offered to retrieve it. His teacher, Mrs. Katsuragi, offered to accompany him, but he declined, assuring her he would be fine. As he walked through the halls, he was unaware of Toga following him. When he reached the cubbies, he bumped into her. She had blonde hair styled in messy buns and wore a school uniform. With a crazed look on her face, she greeted him enthusiastically. Izuku felt a rush of anxiety and tried to excuse himself, but Toga's demeanor only grew more intense. She remarked that he resembled someone she used to know, someone who had been hurt. Izuku's heart raced as he realized the implication. Toga's excitement seemed to escalate as she expressed her longing to see him in a similar state. Before he could react, she tackled him to the ground, brandishing a knife and exclaiming her thrill at the situation. Just then, 𝐻𝐿's voice rang out, demanding Toga to let go of her son. Izuku quickly scrambled to his feet as 𝐻𝐭 intervened, tackling Toga away from him. Confusion and fear filled the air as Mrs. 𝐾𝐮𝐬𝐽 arrived, shocked to see the scene unfolding. She noticed Izuku's injury and expressed concern, while Izuku, feeling a mix of anger and protectiveness, glared at Toga. Mrs. 𝐾𝐮𝐬𝐽 reprimanded Toga for her behavior, but Toga merely smirked, unfazed. She threw a knife at Izuku, which he narrowly dodged, embedding it in the wall behind him. Toga's excitement only seemed to grow, and she promised that she would return for him. Izuku, feeling the weight of the situation, knew he had to be cautious. With his mother and teacher present, he couldn't reveal his true abilities or how he could handle Toga. The tension in the air was palpable, and he realized that this encounter was just the beginning of a much larger challenge ahead. "I love you," she exclaimed before running out. The three stood in shock, their eyes still glued to the door. 𝐻𝐭 turned to Mrs. 𝐾𝐮𝐬𝐽 and bowed, expressing her gratitude for the time spent there. Mrs. 𝐾𝐮𝐬𝐽 nodded in understanding, assuring 𝐻𝐭 that the matter would not go unnoticed and that she would inform the principal and the girl's parents. Izuku and 𝐻𝐭 both thought that the principal and her parents couldn't do much. "Oh, thank you. We'll head off now," 𝐻𝐭 said with a smile. She took Izuku's hand and hurried out of the building, rushing to the car. With each passing second, Izuku felt 𝐻𝐭's grip on his hand tighten, almost painfully so. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Am I okay? Are you okay?" She replied, her voice rising. "That girl hurt you, Izuku. She's dangerous." She fumbled for her car keys and unlocked the vehicle. Izuku took a seat in the front beside her. "I told you I'm okay," he said calmly. 𝐻𝐭 started driving, but her mind seemed elsewhere, making Izuku worry she might lose focus on the road. She didn't do anything else. "Just a small cut, Mom. You're worrying too much," Izuku said in a soothing tone. "Izuku, she's the..." 𝐻𝐭 caught herself, taking a deep breath and slumping in her seat as they stopped by a gas station. "Izuku, she's the villain girl who took me that day. Who knows what else she could have done to you?" I know. The description you gave of her matched. I knew for some time, but you knew. If you knew all this time, why didn't you tell me? You're supposed to tell me these kinds of things, Izuku. I specifically told you not to go near her if you ever saw that girl. And I know you didn't forget. I just told you about her last week. Not to mention you asked a lot of questions about her. Why didn't you tell me? Tell me why." 𝐻𝐭's voice echoed with frustration. A heavy silence filled the air. Izuku flinched, his eyes widening at the intensity of 𝐻𝐭's voice. He had never heard her yell like that, especially not at him. Tears began to well up in his eyes, and he felt a sickening sensation in his stomach. As tears rolled down his cheeks, he shut his eyes, trying to hold them back, but more fell. It felt like the moment when someone he loved looked at him with disappointment, and he feared that they might never love him the same way again. "Why are you crying, you idiot? You get yelled at all the time at home by your father. It's no different. Stop crying," he thought. 𝐻𝐭 looked at Izuku and felt her heart sink. She quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a warm, comforting hug. "Izuku, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to yell at you. I'm really sorry," she sobbed, tears streaming down her own face. Izuku looked up at 𝐻𝐭, his eyes becoming even more teary at the sight of her distress. "Don't cry, please," he begged, hating to see his mom in tears. "It's okay. Just don't cry, please," he said, his own tears continuing to fall. They remained in each other's embrace for several minutes until 𝐻𝐭 noticed that Izuku had fallen asleep in her arms. The next day afternoon, "Izuku, sweetie," 𝐻𝐭 called from the living room. Izuku poked his head out the door, asking what she needed. "𝐾𝐮𝐭 is coming again. Can you sweep the floors, please?" "Why, sure," he replied, rushing to the closet to grab a broom and dustpan. Half an hour later, "I think that's him. I'll let him in," Izuku exclaimed, running to the door. He opened it to find 𝐾𝐮𝐭 standing there with a box of P&D cake in his hands, which he was used to by now. What surprised Izuku, however, was the bouquet of flowers 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 held. "Come in, Mr. Flick," Izuku said, stepping aside to let him in. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 smiled and removed his shoes, placing them neatly aside. He walked in and waved at 𝐴𝐻𝐾o, who was busy transferring cookies from a tray to a large plate. She had made them especially because she knew how much both Izuku and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 enjoyed them. 𝐴𝐻𝐾o approached the couch where Izuku and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 were chatting and placed the plate of cookies on the table. Just as she was about to sit next to Izuku, he quickly moved to the spot she intended to occupy, forcing her to sit in the middle next to 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Unfortunately, the two adults were oblivious to Izuku's antics. 𝐴𝐻𝐾o, I forgot to say. I got these for you," 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 said, handing her the flowers. 𝐴𝐻𝐾o blushed and inhaled the fragrance. Thank you, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. They're wonderful," she smiled. "You know what?" Izuku thought, feeling mischievous. "I need the bathroom. I'll be back in a minute," he said with a grin. "But didn't you just use it 5 minutes ago?" 𝐴𝐻𝐾o began, but Izuku interrupted her. "I'll be back in a minute," he called, dashing off. He hid behind the wall, watching the two of them. An awkward silence settled between 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and 𝐴𝐻𝐾o. "I'll tell her today. I need to tell her now. But she's already married. So I can't hold it in anymore," 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 thought, gathering his courage. "𝐴𝐻𝐾o, there's something I've been meaning to tell you for some time," he began. 𝐴𝐻𝐾o's cheeks flushed. "What is it, 𝐀𝐮𝐿?" Yes, come on, tell her," Izuku urged silently in his mind. I love waffle toilets." Izuku fell to the floor in disbelief. Waffle toilets, he thought, stunned. Waffle toilets? 𝐻𝐾o echoed, confused. No, not waffle toilets. What I meant to say was, I love your cookies," 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 said, flashing an innocent smile. Izuku leaned against the wall, face-palming. "You had one job. One job, Mr. Flick," he thought. "I'm such an idiot." 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 lamented internally. Did he mistake my cookies for waffle toilets? 𝐻𝐾o pondered, intrigued. "I really enjoyed today, 𝐻𝐾o. The movie you picked was fantastic. Thank you for inviting me over," 𝐀𝐮𝐿 said, bowing slightly. "You can come anytime you like, 𝐀𝐮𝐿," 𝐻𝐾o replied with a smile. "Yes, sir. Anytime," Izuku teased, smirking. 𝐻𝐾o playfully smacked Izuku on the back of the head. He exclaimed. "You had too much sugar again, Izuku," 𝐻𝐾o scolded. WhatIf? Izuku asked, bewildered. 𝐻𝐾o pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm sorry about him. He gets a little crazy and goofy when he eats a lot of sugar," she mumbled. 𝐀𝐮𝐿 chuckled. "It's all right. I guess I'll get going then," he said, looking at Izuku and 𝐻𝐾o. "I really enjoy spending time with the two of you." "Thank you," he smiled. 𝐻𝐾o returned his smile softly, expressing how much she enjoyed spending time with him. 𝐀𝐮𝐿 waved goodbye to both of them, while Izuku waved enthusiastically at Mr. Flicky. Later that night, Izuku was patrolling as usual, planning to head home after one more hour. Suddenly, he was pulled aside by Eraserhead. Startled, Izuku fell to the ground and looked up at Aizawa. He wondered if Aizawa needed something. Aizawa sighed, indicating he just wanted to talk. Izuku mumbled that he needed to finish his patrol, but Aizawa knelt in front of him, pleading for him to listen. Confused, Izuku reluctantly agreed, urging Aizawa to get up. Aizawa stood and began to speak, acknowledging that he understood why Izuku might be upset. Izuku expressed his feelings of betrayal, revealing that he thought they were friends and had grown close. Aizawa admitted he had doubted Izuku after a lie detector test involving a police officer, which led him to worry about the potential consequences if Izuku were indeed a villain. He had focused on the negatives and made the mistake of doubting Izuku, which weighed heavily on him. Aizawa confessed that Izuku meant everything to him and that he couldn't bear to lose another friend due to his own mistakes. Izuku's youthful spirit took over, and he ran to hug Aizawa, who was taken aback. Izuku forgave him, and they decided to meet on the same roof after their patrols, coincidentally the same roof where they had first met. Izuku jumped onto the roof and sat beside Aizawa, who was perched on the edge. Izuku greeted him, and Aizawa playfully called him a problem adult, nearly causing Izuku to fall off the roof. Aizawa chuckled, noting that he had heard it was bad but not that bad. They exchanged playful banter, and Aizawa pulled out 2 cups, offering Izuku a frappuccino while he kept a coffee for himself. Izuku expressed his gratitude, revealing that the drink was actually his favorite. Aizawa took a sip of his coffee, and as they enjoyed their drinks, Izuku placed his mask down between them. Aizawa's eyes widened in surprise as Izuku removed his mask to take a sip of his drink. Aizawa realized he could discover Izuku's true identity but chose to respect his trust instead. After finishing their drinks, Izuku put his mask back on and thanked Aizawa for not looking. An hour later, Eri asked if Aizawa was friends with Mr. Smiley now. Aizawa, with a blank expression, denied it, only to be interrupted by Hisashi, who awkwardly explained that Eri couldn't sleep and wanted to wait for him. Eri revealed that she and Hitoshi had overheard Aizawa and Izuku's earlier conversation. Aizawa, frustrated, yelled at Hitoshi for eavesdropping, while Eri innocently insisted that Aizawa and Mr. Smiley were friends again. Hitoshi urged Aizawa to admit it, and Eri joined in, chanting for him to confess. Eventually, Aizawa relented, declaring that they were friends. Meanwhile, Tsukachi mentioned the need to clarify the situation in the news, as civilians still viewed Izuku as dangerous. Nizu agreed, emphasizing the urgency. Aizawa nodded, reinforcing the need for swift action. Endeavor interjected, claiming Izuku was still a threat, but Aizawa countered that Izuku was simply strong and that they needed to focus on training to improve. Endeavor muttered something under his breath, and Aizawa, being the closest to Izuku, was asked if he thought Izuku was married or perhaps a father. Tsukachi inquired whether they were dealing with a young adult still living with his parents. Aizawa mumbled that he could try to ask him, but he hesitated. Tsukachi suggested they should reconsider their pursuit of the individual. The room fell silent as Endeavor interjected, adamantly declaring that they could not let a villain go. Aizawa countered, emphasizing that the person in question was a vigilante, not a villain. Endeavor continued to argue, but Aizawa pointed out that the vigilante had been assisting them for a year, providing valuable information and support during missions. He even mentioned the free coffee he received from him. Aizawa insisted that there was no reason to apprehend him, as he wasn't causing any trouble. Endeavor, frustrated, was about to retort when Aizawa interrupted him again, expressing disbelief that Endeavor knew he referred to the vigilante as problem child. Tsukachi sided with Aizawa, stating that there was no longer a reason to pursue the vigilante. Endeavor, fuming, insisted that they needed to discuss the matter with everyone else before storming out of the room, leaving the others bewildered. Present Mike shrugged, commenting on Endeavor's anger issues. Meanwhile, Hisashi forcefully threw Izuku out of the basement, kicking him across the floor just as Inko returned from shopping. Upon unlocking the door, she was met with the anguished cries of her son. While she was away, Izuku had endured torment in the basement, where Hisashi had taken BLD from him, causing him immense pain. The situation had escalated far beyond acceptable limits. Just moments after Inko arrived home, Hisashi kicked Izuku out of the basement. Inko rushed to her son, enveloping him in her arms as he silently wept. Her heart ached at the sight of his suffering. She glared at Hisashi, who merely scoffed and walked away. Inko apologized profusely, expressing her regret for not arriving sooner. Izuku, despite his pain, reassured her that it wasn't her fault, reminding her that he had said so many times before. Inko lamented her inability to protect them, wishing they could escape and live a happy life together. Izuku, trying to comfort her, promised that he had a plan for their escape. A week later, Inko was washing dishes in the kitchen when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw Hisashi, who offered an unexpected apology. Inko was taken aback, struggling to comprehend his words. Hisashi admitted that he had lost control upon discovering that Izuku had not inherited a quirk and had hurt both her and Izuku. He expressed deep remorse, his hands trembling as he fought back tears. Inko stood in silence, conflicted about how to respond. She noticed that he resembled Izuku when he cried, and for a moment, she considered forgiving him. However, the memories of his past actions against her and Izuku weighed heavily on her heart. Hisashi continued, expressing a longing for their family to return to normalcy, which resonated with 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿. She realized that this was what Izuku wanted as well. Though she couldn't fully forgive him, she decided to give him a chance to regain her trust. Hisashi smiled, a smile reminiscent of Izuku's, and thanked her. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 mentioned that she still needed to speak with Izuku, and Hisashi suggested she call him. Feeling uneasy, 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 nodded and called for Izuku to come downstairs. He was busy on his laptop, hacking into a villain's computer when he heard his mother's voice. However, the sound of a gunshot and 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿's scream sent him racing down the stairs. When he reached the bottom, horror gripped him as he saw 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 lying on the floor, a small pool of blood forming around her. Hisashi stood nearby, holding a gun, his expression unreadable. Izuku's world felt as if it had come to a standstill, shock and dread washing over him. At the police station, Tsukachi asked Aizawa if he was ready to go. Aizawa grumbled in response and headed to the location Tsukachi had provided. Upon arriving at a seemingly ordinary house, he encountered an elderly couple. The woman explained that they had heard a scream from the house, initially dismissing it as their imagination, but then they heard a boy's scream coming from inside. The man explained that they were worried something might have happened. He decided to check on the situation. While Eraserhead was on his way to Izuku's house, a lot was happening inside. Izuku pushed Hisashi aside and rushed to 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿's side, calling out to her with desperation. He reassured her, urging her to hold on, his voice trembling as he fought back tears. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 looked at him with teary eyes and managed a soft smile, expressing her regret for not believing in his potential as a hero. She encouraged him to follow his dreams, regardless of his quirkless status, and told him how proud she was of him for saving her. As she coughed, a small amount of blood escaped her lips. Izuku was taken aback by her words, realizing she had known about his nightly escapades as a vigilante since the first time he saved her. He begged her to stop talking, fearing she was wasting her strength. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 gazed out the window at the blue sky, sunlight reflecting off her tears, and asked him to tell Keisuke that she loved him as more than just a friend. Izuku protested, insisting that she should be the one to tell him. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 smiled gently, hoping he would understand, and he nodded slowly. She urged him to escape and find someone trustworthy to look after him. Izuku vehemently disagreed, insisting that she would be the one to take care of him, and reminded her of their plan to escape together. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 reassured him, wiping away his tears, but more fell in their place. She called him her appealing boy and expressed her love for him. As her hand slipped from his face and fell to the floor, Izuku's heart sank. He called out to her, shaking as he realized her eyes were closed and her hand was limp. Hisashi, distracted, glanced out the window and noticed Eraserhead speaking with the neighbors. He grabbed a bag and told Izuku not to worry, claiming he was just going out to buy milk. With a threatening smile, he warned Izuku to keep quiet about what had happened, making a chilling gesture with a knife near his throat before leaving. Izuku's horror deepened as he looked back at his mother, panic setting in as he cried out for her repeatedly. Aizawa, who was about to enter the house, sprinted in response to the boy's scream. Izuku collapsed in front of his mother's lifeless body, letting out a heart-wrenching cry. Aizawa rushed into the living room, horrified by the sight before him. He quickly moved to Izuku's side, trying to comfort him as the boy continued to cry in despair. Eventually, Izuku fell silent, and Aizawa noticed he had drifted off to sleep. Aizawa called Tsukachi to inform him of the situation and decided to take Izuku to the hospital. He watched over the sleeping boy, feeling a weight in his chest. Aizawa pulled out his phone and called Hisashi, waiting for him to answer. When Hisashi finally spoke, Aizawa was startled by his enthusiasm. He tried to explain the situation, but Hisashi interrupted, fearing the worst. Aizawa reassured him that they were not breaking up and suggested they meet at the hospital. Hisashi quickly drove to the hospital, bursting into the waiting room with excitement. Aizawa led him to Izuku's room, where Hisashi's expression shifted to concern as he saw the boy sleeping. Aizawa explained that a call had been made about screams coming from a house, leading him to discover that Izuku had just witnessed his mother's death. Hisashi gently brushed a strand of hair from Izuku's face, his heart heavy with sadness. Aizawa and Hisashi took a seat outside the room to discuss what to do next. Aizawa expressed his longing to adopt Izuku, and Hisashi, wide-eyed with surprise, enthusiastically agreed, insisting they couldn't leave him alone. Aizawa confirmed that they could fill out the adoption forms at the front desk, and they both felt a sense of purpose as they planned to give Izuku the family he deserved. Aizawa struggled to find the right words to express his feelings about the situation, mumbling something about how he was unsure. Hisashi, filled with excitement, exclaimed that Eri and Hitoshi would be thrilled. Aizawa confirmed his assumption, and Hisashi insisted that he would have said yes without needing to be asked. Aizawa then stated they should get the adoption papers. A nurse approached Hisashi and Aizawa, quietly informing them that the boy was awake. Aizawa thanked her, and both men made their way to see Izuku. When they entered the room, they found Izuku sitting up, staring blankly out the window. Hisashi sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder and asking where his mother was. Izuku's monotone voice asked about his mother, and Aizawa, looking down, regretfully informed him that she hadn't made it. Izuku simply acknowledged this with a quiet, "Okay." Hisashi rubbed circles on Izuku's back in a calming manner, and Izuku expressed his gratitude for their presence, stating he should leave if there was nothing else. Aizawa inquired about where he intended to go. Izuku fell silent, contemplating his options. He realized he had no relatives and that returning home would likely mean facing his father. He decided that the streets would be his only option, mumbling about needing to go to a place he knew. Aizawa then asked if he wanted to go to America with his father, showing him a file that indicated his father had divorced and moved there 3 months prior. Izuku firmly refused, stating he would not go with him. Aizawa insisted that Izuku would come with them since he had nowhere else to go. Izuku was taken aback by the idea of being adopted, unsure if he wanted to be a burden. However, Aizawa assured him they were serious about adopting him. Izuku hesitated, expressing that he didn't want to impose on them. Aizawa and Hisashi, however, were determined to bring him along. Hisashi, with a sad look, questioned why Izuku thought they wouldn't want him. Izuku looked down, revealing his insecurity about being quirkless. Aizawa bluntly stated that it didn't matter to him, and Hisashi echoed this sentiment, assuring Izuku that there was nothing wrong with being quirkless. Aizawa then asked if Izuku had anything he wanted to bring from his house. After a moment of thought, Izuku mentioned he had a few things. Yamada smiled and suggested they all go get his belongings. Izuku initially resisted, insisting he would be fine on his own, but Aizawa insisted he needed someone to take care of him. Upon entering Izuku's home, he felt a wave of sadness wash over him as he looked around the living room, the last place he had seen his mother. Hisashi noted the unpleasant smell in the air, and Izuku explained that his father drank. As they moved to his room, both men were taken aback by the sight before them. The room was in disarray, with shattered bottles and signs of neglect everywhere. Aizawa thought about how the room resembled a crime scene. Izuku's room was nearly empty, containing only a couple of blankets, a pillow, a small side table with a water bottle, and a desk cluttered with notebooks and an old laptop. The closet held very few clothes, many of which were in poor condition due to his father's abuse. Hisashi, visibly shaken, asked what Izuku wanted to take. Izuku replied that he would take a few things, specifically the stack of notebooks. Curious, Hisashi asked about the notebooks, and Izuku explained that he took notes and analyzed heroes, something he had enjoyed since childhood. Aizawa asked to see them, and as Izuku handed them over, he continued to gather his belongings. Aizawa was impressed by the content of the notebooks. Izuku took one of his blankets and some clothes from the closet, but Hisashi insisted on getting him new ones, taking the items from Izuku's hands. Izuku protested, feeling undeserving of their kindness. Hisashi reassured him that he deserved better. Izuku thought to himself that they knew him as Egao but not as Izuku, questioning their kindness toward a stranger. Aizawa inquired about something Izuku had mentioned, but Izuku fell silent, worried he had revealed too much. He quickly changed the subject, taking his laptop and leaving the room. He then entered Hisashi's room, which was notably tidy compared to the rest of the house. Aizawa asked if it was his parents' room, and Izuku clarified that it was his father's room. Ignoring the question, Izuku rummaged through a drawer and found a picture frame containing a photo of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, Hisashi, and himself. He glared at the picture of Hisashi, and sensing the tension, Hisashi tried to lighten the mood by commenting on how cute Izuku looked as a child. Izuku mumbled that he was 3 years old in the photo, reflecting on how it was the last family picture they had taken before everything changed. Continuing to search through the drawers, Izuku discovered a box filled with money and credit cards. Determined to prevent his father from benefiting from it, he took the box and handed it to Aizawa, who was taken aback by the gesture. Izuku insisted that it belonged to his parents and that he couldn't take it for himself, wanting Aizawa and Hisashi to have it instead. Izuku mumbled about being the adults, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. Yamada looked around and asked if he needed anything else, to which Izuku replied that this was all he needed. With a smile, Yamada encouraged them to go, assuring Izuku that he would love meeting Eri and Shinso. Aizawa placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, and the three of them walked out together. As they drove, Izuku sat in the back, gazing out the window. The car ride was mostly quiet, with Yamada attempting to spark a conversation. Hisashi asked Izuku questions, but the exchanges were brief and did not lead to a deeper conversation. Eventually, Yamada decided to wait until they were home to engage Izuku further. It would take time for them to grow close. When the car came to a stop, they all exited. Izuku took a moment to look at the house, feeling a wave of hesitance and anxiety wash over him. He took a deep breath and clenched his fists. Aizawa opened the door, and almost immediately, a small girl rushed out, wrapping her arms around the two adults. Izuku recognized her as the girl he had saved from overhaul, Eri. Hitoshi approached the door, waving at Hisashi and Aizawa. Yamada struggled to wave back, nearly engulfed by Eri's enthusiastic hug. Hitoshi chuckled, asking Eri to let go, while she apologized to her father and papa. Hitoshi then noticed Izuku and, with a curious expression, asked who he was. Izuku looked down, feeling embarrassed and thinking that he shouldn't be there. Aizawa seemed to sense his discomfort and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, explaining that Izuku was his brother, whom they were adopting. He encouraged Hitoshi and Eri to treat him kindly, as he was now part of their family. Eri's eyes lit up with excitement, while Hitoshi remained calm. He welcomed Izuku to the family and extended his hand, asking for his name. Izuku hesitantly introduced himself, mumbling his full name. Hitoshi confirmed that he could call him Izuku, to which Izuku nodded. Suddenly, Hisashi felt a chill and turned around, his heart racing as he saw Namuri standing at the doorway behind Aizawa and Yamada, her eyes glowing with intensity. Hisashi jumped into Aizawa's arms, pointing at Namuri in fear. Aizawa turned to face her, bewildered by her presence. Hitoshi and Eri peeked out, asking if Aunt Namuri was okay. Eri squeaked her concern, while Hitoshi wondered if she was possessed. Namuri's voice rang out, filled with disbelief as she exclaimed that they hadn't told her about the new addition to the family. Hisashi and Aizawa stammered, trying to explain that it had all happened so quickly. Namuri marched up to them, playfully slapping their arms, and then turned her attention to Izuku, enveloping him in a tight hug and pinching his cheeks. Her demeanor shifted from fierce to cheerful in an instant, and she exclaimed how cute he was. Izuku thought to himself that he disliked having his cheeks pinched. Hitoshi deadpanned that they hadn't even met for 5 minutes before Namuri was going to smother him. Realizing her exuberance, she released Izuku and ruffled his hair, apologizing for her enthusiasm. She then declared that they were going on a shopping spree to spoil him, much to Mick's delight. Aizawa sighed, allowing her to do as she pleased. Eri excitedly pulled Izuku by the arm, leading him inside and greeting him with a bright smile. Once inside, Midnight, Aizawa, and Yamada discussed the shopping plans while Hitoshi joined Eri and Izuku. Izuku awkwardly expressed that he preferred not to be called Mr., as it made him feel old, causing a brief silence in the room. Realizing his mistake, he stammered an explanation, clarifying that he wanted to be on a first-name basis since they would be living together. Yamada suggested they help him settle in before heading out to shop. Eri and Hitoshi eagerly volunteered to show him his room. Izuku, still feeling out of place, mentioned he could sleep in the backyard, which shocked both Namuri and Yamada. Hitoshi chuckled, assuring Izuku that he would need to get used to their reactions. Eri led them to the new room, and Izuku marveled at its size, reiterating his preference for camping in the backyard. Hitoshi insisted that he was part of the family now and deserved to stay inside. Izuku attempted to smile but felt a weight on his heart. Hitoshi noticed the BLD on Izuku's clothes and asked about it, his concern evident. Izuku brushed it off, assuring him he was fine. Just then, Hizashi entered the room, surprising both boys. Eri giggled at their startled expressions. Hizashi explained that this was an extra room in their house, and they had already used one for guests. He reassured Izuku that this room was perfect for him. Present Mike playfully ruffled Izuku's hair, telling him he didn't need to keep thanking them. As they prepared to leave, Yamada announced it was time to head to the mall for shopping. Midnight quickly grabbed Izuku and dashed out of the house, with Hizashi, Hitoshi, and Eri following closely behind. Aizawa groaned, slowly unzipping himself from his sleeping bag and making his way to the car, which had 8 seats. Hizashi and Nemuri took the front seats, while Izuku, Eri, and Hitoshi settled into the middle row, with Eri sitting between them. Aizawa claimed the last row for himself, content to have his own space. He settled into his sleeping bag, stretched across the 3 seats in the back, and quickly fell asleep. The last 3 rows had become his makeshift bed. Izuku glanced back and awkwardly stared at Aizawa. He felt a rush of confusion and disbelief. He turned away, wishing he could erase the image from his mind. It was something he couldn't unsee. Hitoshi chuckled, finding humor in Izuku's reaction, and reassured him that he would have to get used to it. Izuku's thoughts spiraled. He questioned how he had ended up in this situation. He felt out of place, as if he didn't belong with this family. They were being so kind, and he couldn't understand why. They were even taking him shopping, treating him like one of their own. He felt undeserving of their generosity, burdened by guilt over the past. He believed he was the reason for the troubles that had befallen his family, and he felt he should not be alive. The atmosphere shifted as everyone fell silent, leaving Izuku puzzled. They had been chatting about something trivial, and now it felt heavy. Hizashi spoke up, reminding Izuku that he wasn't a stranger and urged him not to think such things. Izuku regretted his mumbling habit, which often led to him voicing his inner turmoil. He stumbled over his words, unsure of how to address Hizashi, who was looking at him through the rearview mirror. Hizashi smiled and encouraged Izuku to take his time with his response. Hizashi then called out to Aizawa, who groaned in response, indicating he would remain in the car while the others went inside. Midnight suddenly called out to Izuku, excitedly holding up a bright neon sweater adorned with large triangles. While it wasn't his style, he didn't want to hurt her feelings, so he hesitated. 𝗀𝐿 commented dryly on the choice of clothing, suggesting they should buy something Izuku would actually like. Nemuri slumped back, disappointed. Eventually they found a few items that suited Izuku's taste. He selected some baggy shirts and sweaters, preferring them oversized so he could wear them for years to come. Just when he thought everything was going well, Midnight threw a yellow sweater at him, exclaiming that everyone loved it. As he caught it and unfolded it, his heart raced with anger. It was an All Might sweater, identical to one he had owned before his father sold all his All Might merchandise. The memories flooded back, and he felt a surge of resentment toward the hero he once admired. In a moment of frustration, he threw the sweater aside, causing shock and confusion among those around him, including some curious onlookers. A teenager even started recording the scene. Izuku felt exposed, wishing everyone would just move on. Present Mike approached him, asking if something was wrong. Izuku quickly fabricated a story about a spider on the sweater, hoping to deflect attention. Mike laughed, sharing his own dislike for spiders, which lightened the mood slightly. Eri, standing on a box of toilet paper, crossed her arms and declared that everyone should leave Izuku alone. Her fierce demeanor surprisingly intimidated the onlookers, and they began to disperse. Grateful for her intervention, Izuku felt a sense of relief wash over him. Once the commotion settled, Izuku approached Present Mike, asking if he could visit the arts and crafts section. Mike agreed and suggested taking Eri along, who had expressed interest in going as well. Izuku tapped Eri on the shoulder, and she greeted him with a smile, eager to join him. As they walked to the crafts aisle, Izuku noticed Eri picking out art supplies. Hitoshi approached him, inquiring about his plans. Izuku mentioned wanting to make action figures of Eraserhead, Present Mike, and Midnight since he hadn't found any in the store. Hitoshi expressed admiration for Izuku's creativity, trying to ease the awkwardness between them. Izuku struggled to maintain the conversation, feeling the weight of his own insecurities. Just then, a group of men approached Eri, and Hitoshi's protective instincts kicked in. He started to march toward her, but Izuku grabbed his hand, urging him to reconsider. He understood Hitoshi's concern but believed that confronting the men might escalate the situation. There were no adults in the area, leaving them on their own for now. They had to be cautious, especially with Eri present. The thought of her getting hurt was unbearable, but for the moment, all they could do was wait and observe. If anyone tried to harm her, Izuku would step in without hesitation. Hitoshi nodded, swallowing hard as they turned around, pretending to shop. Eri smiled brightly at a stranger, her innocence shining through. Izuku couldn't help but worry. Hadn't anyone taught her about the dangers of talking to strangers? One of the men nearby smirked, suggesting they could pressure the parents for money. He reached for Eri's hand and began to pull her away. Eri's frightened screams pierced the air, and Izuku felt a surge of anger as his fists clenched. Hitoshi's expression turned to one of pure rage as well. Ignoring Hitoshi's calls to stop, Izuku charged at the man, delivering a swift punch to his face, demanding that they let Eri go. The scene shifted quickly. The three men lay on the ground, unconscious. Eri rushed to Hitoshi, hugging his leg tightly, while he stood in shock. Izuku had dispatched the group in mere seconds. Hitoshi pointed out the BLD on Izuku's head, worry etched on his face. One of the men had managed to strike Izuku, but he brushed off the concern, assuring Eri that he would be fine. Hitoshi insisted they should get bandages since they were at the store. Izuku felt a mix of emotions as Hitoshi reassured Eri that they were like family now, encouraging her to ask for help whenever she needed it. Hitoshi then pointed out that they should inform their parents, who were heroes, about the situation. Izuku felt a twinge of guilt for not thinking of that sooner. Suddenly, Nemuri's voice called out for them, her tone shifting from curiosity to shock as she saw the scene before her. Aizawa and Hizashi rushed to their side, alarmed at the sight of a crying girl and a boy with visible injuries, while three grown men lay incapacitated nearby. Izuku explained that the men had tried to take Eri, and as Hizashi went to fetch bandages, Hitoshi struggled to process everything that had happened. Aizawa questioned who had fought the men, and Hitoshi hesitantly admitted it was Izuku. Aizawa's expression shifted as he realized the implications of Izuku's actions. Despite Izuku's insistence that he was okay, Aizawa remained concerned, especially when Hizashi returned with the bandages. As Hizashi secured the bandages around Izuku's head, he noticed Izuku's bleeding fist as well. Izuku explained that he had to strike the man multiple times to subdue him. Both Aizawa and Hizashi exchanged worried glances, sensing that something was off. The car ride back to their home was filled with an awkward silence. Aizawa kept glancing at Izuku, as if trying to decipher something. Did he suspect Izuku's true identity? The thought nagged at Izuku, making him feel uneasy. They arrived at the house, and Yamada announced that he and Aizawa would start painting Izuku's room while Nemuri and the others could get to know each other better. Izuku hesitated, feeling guilty about the preparations being made for him. He didn't want a room, he felt fine in the backyard. But Nemuri insisted on painting, lifting up buckets of paint to emphasize her point. The tension escalated as everyone began to speak over each other, and Aizawa finally shouted for silence, expressing his frustration. In that moment, Izuku realized how much they cared for him, and despite the chaos, he felt a sense of belonging. Hitoshi informed Izuku that his room would take some time to be ready and offered for him to sleep in his room instead. Izuku hesitated, feeling out of place, but Hitoshi insisted that he was no longer a guest. Eri, excited, asked if she could help paint, tugging at Aizawa's clothes. Yamada happily agreed, ruffling her hair, while Nemuri shouted her willingness to help as well. Hitoshi chuckled, admitting he had nothing better to do, and Hizashi enthusiastically encouraged everyone to join in. A bucket of green and black paint appeared as Nomiuri entered the room, ready to start. She pointed a large paintbrush at Izuku, treating it like a microphone, and asked how he wanted the design. After some playful urging, Izuku suggested black walls with green line details. Nomiuri announced the design to everyone, and they all began painting, splitting into groups. Izuku and Hitoshi worked on the wall by the door while the others chatted, trying to include Izuku in their conversations. He struggled with socializing but knew he needed to start connecting with them. Yamada playfully pointed out paint on Eri's nose, making her giggle. When Eri exclaimed she couldn't reach the top, Aizawa lifted her onto his shoulders, and she continued painting joyfully. The scene felt strangely familiar to Izuku, and memories from his past began to resurface. He recalled moments with his parents, where laughter and painting filled their home. Those memories were bittersweet, reminding him of the loss he felt after his mother passed away. Hitoshi noticed Izuku's distant expression and asked if he was okay. Izuku reassured him he was fine, but guilt gnawed at him. He reflected on his mother's death, wishing he could have done more to protect her. The weight of those thoughts made him feel like an outsider in his new home. Later that night, as everyone settled down for bed, Izuku lay quietly in Hitoshi's room, wrestling with feelings of guilt and inadequacy. He felt he didn't belong and worried about being a burden. After a moment of hesitation, he quietly thanked Hitoshi for his hospitality, to which Hitoshi responded with a light-hearted chuckle, telling him to stop being so grateful. The next morning, Hitoshi was jolted awake by his alarm and quickly realized Izuku was missing. Panic set in as he rushed to alert Aizawa and Hizashi, only to find they were also not in their room. He ran to Eri's room, but she was gone too. Frantic, he wondered where everyone had gone. Yamada poked his head into Eri's room, confused by Hitoshi's distress. Hitoshi clarified that he thought everyone had vanished, and Yamada, still bewildered, encouraged him to get ready. Hitoshi recalled a past incident where Aizawa had woken him up with cold water, shivering at the memory. Entering the kitchen, Hitoshi rubbed his eyes and was surprised to see Izuku cooking. He was taken aback by Izuku's efforts and felt it was unnecessary. Izuku, however, expressed that he enjoyed cooking. Hizashi complimented Izuku's skills, making him shyly thank him. Aizawa reminded Izuku to eat something, concerned for his well-being. When asked what he had for breakfast, Izuku awkwardly replied that he had coffee and an apple, which prompted Aizawa to insist he needed to eat more. Izuku tried to reassure him, mentioning that at least it was better than burnt toast. Hitoshi expressed his disapproval, but Izuku chose to ignore him and began collecting the empty plates. He approached Eri, who looked up at him with curiosity and handed over her plate along with her utensils. She asked if he wanted the fork too, and Izuku nodded, taking the plate from her hands and walking back to the sink. Hizashi questioned what Izuku was doing, and slowly, Izuku turned on the sink to wash the dishes. Nomiuri quickly jumped out of her seat and approached him, laughing nervously. She insisted that he didn't need to do that. Confused by the attention he was receiving, Izuku thought about his actions. He quietly remarked that he was just washing dishes and felt he should contribute to earn his place there. Hizashi interjected, emphasizing that Izuku was still a child and it was their responsibility as adults to take care of him. Izuku looked back at Nomiuri and suggested she finish her food, realizing too late how his words might have sounded. He bowed his head in respect and apologized for his tone. Kiyama smiled at him, ruffling his green curly hair, and reassured him that he wasn't rude at all. She encouraged him to take care of himself and suggested he call her Auntie or Midnight instead of Mississippi. Izuku nodded, albeit with a confused expression, and agreed to call her Midnight. Nomiuri sighed in defeat, wishing he had called her Auntie but accepting Midnight as a better alternative. Hitoshi noticed her reaction and asked if she was okay, to which she responded with a laugh, insisting everything was fine. Hitoshi, still concerned, turned his attention back to Izuku, who was washing the dishes. He hesitated before asking Izuku about his adoption and quirk. The room fell silent, the only sound being the running water from the sink. Izuku paused, and the atmosphere shifted as Aizawa and Hizashi exchanged worried glances, realizing they needed to intervene. Aizawa stood up, attempting to stop Hitoshi, but just then, A glass shattered near the sink where Izuku stood. Eri screamed at the sudden noise, and Nemuri rushed to the sink with a dustpan, crouching down to clean the glass. She noticed shards embedded in Izuku's feet, but he remained unfazed. Determined to clean up the glass first, she thought about taking care of him afterward. Izuku stood still, his head hanging low, a shadow obscuring his eyes. Despite Nemuri's urgent calls to be careful, he remained lost in thought. He finally turned to the group and revealed that his fathers had adopted him because his mother had passed away, and he was quirkless. Hitoshi immediately recognized his mistake and felt ashamed. Nemuri dropped the dustpan, scattering the glass shards she had collected. Eri, confused by the term quirkless, recalled hearing Overhaul use it but never understood its meaning. Izuku remained quiet, staring at the ground, feeling regretful for ruining the moment. He knelt down to help Nemuri pick up the glass pieces, then turned to Yamada and Shota, apologizing once more before leaving the room in silence. Izuku walked into the bathroom, unsure of where else to go. Hitoshi felt terrible for his thoughtless question, realizing it was too personal so soon after Izuku's arrival. He stood up to follow Izuku but was stopped by his father, who advised him to give Izuku some space. Hitoshi understood that Izuku needed time to process what had happened and felt guilty for his actions. After 15 minutes, the atmosphere had grown heavier, but his father gave him a reassuring look, signaling that he could check on Izuku. Hitoshi went upstairs, expecting to find Izuku in his room, but instead heard sounds coming from the bathroom. He could make out Izuku's frustrated murmurs, including the words, "You're such an idiot, Izuku." Just as Hitoshi was about to knock, the door swung open abruptly, startling him. He asked if Izuku was okay, but Izuku avoided eye contact, looking everywhere but at him. Hitoshi felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was the cause of Izuku's distress. Izuku seemed to be lost in thought, clearly not feeling his best. He quietly acknowledged his state, but it was evident to everyone around him that he was struggling. Hitoshi suggested going to Nico Cafe, a favorite spot of his and his father's in Japan, known for its playful kittens and delightful food. After a brief pause, Izuku agreed, though his fidgeting hands revealed his unease. As they made their way to the kitchen to say goodbye to Auntie Nemuri, Dad, Papa, and Eri, Aizawa reminded them to return in at least 2 hours. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow at the strictness of the request, but Aizawa's reasoning was clear. With a reluctant acknowledgement, Hitoshi grabbed Izuku's hand, only to notice Izuku flinch at the contact. Apologizing, he let go, feeling a pang of guilt as he observed Izuku rubbing his arm. The walk to the cafe was quiet, and when they arrived, they stood in line for what felt like an eternity. The silence was palpable until they reached the cashier, where a familiar face greeted them. Ayato, a brown-haired boy with bright orange eyes, recognized Izuku immediately and expressed his surprise at not having seen him in days. Izuku's quiet response hinted at his discomfort, and Hitoshi sensed that this outing might not have been the best idea. Ayato introduced himself enthusiastically, and Hitoshi explained his name to avoid confusion with Aizawa. The friendly banter continued as they placed their orders. Izuku opted for a medium coffee, while Hitoshi ordered a large coffee and 2 souffle pancakes. When Ayato expressed surprise at their friendship, Izuku hesitated, clearly not wanting to delve into his complicated family situation. As they settled at a table, Hitoshi noticed Ayato's concerned gaze on Izuku. It was clear that they shared a bond, and Hitoshi felt a mix of emotions about Izuku's past. When their food arrived, Izuku insisted on paying, despite Hitoshi's protests. The exchange highlighted their differing views on gratitude and repayment, with Izuku feeling indebted despite his new circumstances. After a moment of silence, Hitoshi decided it was time to address the morning's earlier tension. He apologized for being too direct with his questions, acknowledging that he should have approached the topic more sensitively. Izuku reassured him that he wasn't upset, understanding the curiosity behind Hitoshi's inquiries. The atmosphere began to lighten as they enjoyed their coffees, the bond between them gradually strengthening amidst the playful chaos of the cafe. Izuku inquired about the situation, noting that it was just him, his sister, and their aunt. The response was that while she wasn't related by BLD, she was considered an aunt to them. Izuku absorbed this information quietly, and as their conversation progressed, things began to feel more comfortable. However, Izuku remained serious and somewhat reserved, showing signs of nervousness. Determined to help him open up, the narrator felt that Izuku could become a great brother. After a while, Izuku and Hitoshi returned home from the cafe, where Eri eagerly greeted Hitoshi with excitement. She then turned to Izuku, her face lighting up with joy. Izuku waved back, while Hitoshi playfully ruffled Eri's hair, eliciting laughter from her. Hisashi approached the trio with a broad smile, lifting Eri into the air and asking the boys about their time together. Hitoshi confirmed it was enjoyable, and Izuku nodded in agreement, which made Hisashi feel hopeful about their growing bond. Curious about Aunt Nemuri's whereabouts, Hitoshi learned that she had been busy and had to leave. Aizawa then called Hitoshi aside, claiming he needed assistance with something. Hitoshi, puzzled, ran over to him. Aizawa revealed that he was actually interested in what had transpired between Hitoshi and Izuku. Hitoshi expressed that the outing had been better than expected, but he worried that Izuku hadn't enjoyed it and might not like him. Aizawa reassured Hitoshi, explaining that Izuku struggled to express his emotions and had faced many challenges. They could support him in finding his way. Hitoshi, feeling determined, agreed that they would help Izuku, and Aizawa affirmed that they were all there for him, though it would take time. 2 hours later, the family had finished setting up Izuku's room, which was painted in black with green accents, just as he had envisioned. The room featured a regular-sized bed in the corner, adorned with pillows and sheets in shades of black, light gray, and dark green. A small bookshelf and closet were positioned on the left side, along with 2 long shelves for personal items. Midnight and Mike had added a few extra decorations, perhaps a bit too many, but they were excited about it. Yamada almost brought in a television, but Shota stopped him just in time. After the decorating was complete, Izuku sat on the couch, feeling uncertain about what to do next. Aizawa approached him, asking if he was bored. Izuku scratched the back of his neck and quietly suggested that he could help with chores, but Aizawa chuckled, saying he didn't want him to do any work at that moment. They shared a brief silence before Aizawa asked if Izuku had any friends he wanted to visit. Izuku pondered this, realizing he didn't have anyone left. He thought about Mitsuki, recalling their close friendship and the difficult news she deserved to know, but he hesitated at the thought of seeing Katsuki again. As he contemplated, Aizawa noticed the delay in Izuku's response and wondered why it was taking so long for him to think of someone. Finally, Izuku nervously mentioned that he did have someone in mind. Aizawa felt relieved and asked if he wanted a ride to their house or if he preferred to have them come over. Izuku opted to walk, expressing gratitude for the offer. Aizawa agreed but reminded him to return before dark and asked for Izuku's number to stay in contact. Izuku hesitated, explaining that he wasn't allowed to share it. Izuku quickly realized what he had said and felt like punching himself. He thought to himself that he didn't have to follow that man's rules anymore. He mumbled that his parents were protective and didn't want him giving out his phone number. He reflected that his mom was fine with it, but his dad was the issue. Aizawa sighed and expressed that he trusted Izuku to add people he thought were good, noting that he seemed like a responsible kid. He then asked for Izuku's phone number. Izuku pulled his phone from his pocket and nodded in reply. They exchanged numbers before Izuku left the house. Standing at the front door, Izuku hesitated before knocking, quietly waiting. After 4 minutes and 3 knocks, he let out an exhausted sigh and began to walk away, feeling defeated. Just as he took 3 steps, the door burst open. He turned to see a tall man with brown hair. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 waved and smiled brightly, inviting him in. Izuku walked back, slightly waving in return and reminding Mr. Flick that he preferred to be called Izuku. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 chuckled, scratching the back of his head, and suggested that Izuku could call him 𝐀𝐻𝐿. Izuku took off his shoes as 𝐀𝐻𝐿 closed the door behind him. They walked to the living room and sat on the couch. 𝐀𝐻𝐿 observed Izuku closely. He asked if Izuku was having a tough day, to which Izuku mumbled in agreement. After a moment of thought, 𝐀𝐻𝐿's mischievous smirk returned as he declared he knew what would cheer Izuku up. He got up and headed into the kitchen, where the sounds of rustling and clattering filled the air. Izuku peeked into the kitchen, feeling a mix of confusion and concern. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 emerged from the kitchen holding a bin filled with cookies that were quite burnt. He explained that he had tried the recipe 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 gave him, admitting they weren't as good as hers but still surprising. He laid a few cookies on a plate and placed it on the coffee table, then took a cookie for himself. He encouraged Izuku to take as many as he liked. Izuku picked one up and took a bite, feeling a pang in his heart as the taste reminded him of 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's cookies. He quietly said it was good. 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 smiled but soon slumped into the couch, his face turning red with embarrassment. He apologized for getting carried away about 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴, admitting he had forgotten about Izuku's dad and felt like an idiot. Izuku reassured him that it was fine, revealing that his dad had divorced his mom about a month ago. He expressed a wish that 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 had ended up with 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴, almost unconsciously sharing his feelings. He reflected that his father had stopped being a father to him years ago. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 noted that he hadn't seen Izuku in a while, mentioning that when he visited 2 days ago, there had been police cars and an ambulance outside the apartment. He asked if something had happened. Izuku fell silent, zoning out for a moment. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 observed his expression, unsure of what was going on. Suddenly, Izuku stood up, letting out a sigh. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 followed suit and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, asking what was wrong. In a quiet voice, Izuku revealed that his mom was gone. 𝐾𝐮𝐿's heart sank at the news, disbelief washing over him. He struggled to accept it, insisting that 𝐾𝐮𝐿 couldn't be gone. Izuku told him that she had loved him, and 𝐾𝐮𝐿 fell to his knees, feeling the world around him grow foggy and hollow. Izuku sat beside him and hugged him tightly. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 gripped Izuku's shoulder, biting his lip in anguish. He thought about how Izuku must feel, realizing that he should be the one comforting him. They sat in silence for a few minutes before 𝐾𝐮𝐿 finally stood up, wiping his eyes and asking when it had happened. Izuku faced him and explained that it had been 2 days. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 was shocked, expressing that Izuku should have come to him sooner. He asked if Izuku was still living in his apartment. Izuku hesitated and revealed that he had been adopted. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 reacted with surprise, asking who had adopted him. Izuku explained that it was 𝐒𝐮𝐴, who had been called to check on the situation at his apartment. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 inquired about how it had all happened, sweat forming on his forehead. Izuku gave him a serious look and insisted that he not seek revenge on the person responsible for his mother's death. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 reluctantly agreed, but confusion crossed his face as he asked if it was his dad. Izuku confirmed that it was, but added that he had stopped being his dad a long time ago. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 had endured abuse since he was 5, and when his mother discovered the truth, the torment escalated. Anger surged within him as he clenched his fists and stood abruptly. He felt a wave of rage wash over him, and as he approached the door, Izuku intervened, reminding him of his promise not to seek out the source of his pain. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 hesitated, realizing that he didn't even know where to find him. With a heavy heart, he returned to his seat, trying to regain his composure. Izuku shared his own feelings of anger, vowing that he would confront the man who had caused them so much suffering. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 placed an arm around Izuku's shoulder, pulling him close. He rested his head against Izuku's, sighing deeply. He understood that Izuku's mother wouldn't want him to seek revenge. Izuku looked down, conflicted, acknowledging his anger while feeling numb inside. His mother had always believed in the possibility of change, but the reality was far from what she had hoped. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 tightened his grip on Izuku's shoulder, expressing his own longing for justice while reminding him that they needed to stay strong. Izuku sighed in agreement, knowing that they couldn't let their emotions lead them down a dark path. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 then asked if 𝐒𝐮𝐴 was treating him well. Izuku nodded, sharing that 𝐒𝐮𝐴 and his family had been kind to him, reminiscent of his mother's care. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 felt a sense of relief at Izuku's calm demeanor but couldn't shake the worry that lingered. He offered Izuku the option to stay with him if he ever felt uncomfortable at 𝐒𝐮𝐴's home. Izuku appreciated the offer, though he couldn't muster a smile. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 had been a steadfast presence in his life, and he felt fortunate to have someone so supportive. Curious about the situation, 𝐾𝐮𝐿 asked if 𝐒𝐮𝐴 would be okay with Izuku staying over. Izuku was uncertain but thought it might be fine, urging 𝐾𝐮𝐿 to stop calling 𝐒𝐮𝐴 Caterpillar. 𝐾𝐮𝐿 couldn't help himself, finding humor in the nickname. Izuku then called Izawa, and while he spoke, 𝐾𝐮𝐿 remained close, listening intently. Flick's mind raced with concern for Izuku's well-being, fearing that Eraserhead might have ulterior motives. Ultimately, Aizawa agreed to let Izuku stay with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, and the two friends spent the night talking, finding solace in each other's company. Despite the weight of sadness and guilt they carried, they eventually fell asleep. The next morning, Izuku returned to Eraserhead's home, greeted by Yamada's cheerful demeanor and Eri's affectionate hug around his leg. Yamada's enthusiasm was overwhelming, and Izuku felt a mix of awkwardness and warmth. He couldn't shake the thoughts of what could have happened to Eri if she hadn't been rescued in time. The injustices she faced ignited a fierce determination within him to protect her. As Izuku reflected on Eri's newfound happiness, Yamada bombarded him with questions about his time with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, his excitement palpable. Hitoshi, by his side, recognized Izuku's discomfort and tried to intervene. Yamada's exuberance was innocent but overwhelming, and Izuku felt the pressure mounting. Just as he was about to ask Yamada to tone it down, Hitoshi stepped in, urging his father to stop. Amid the commotion, Aizawa emerged from upstairs, clearly irritated by the noise. He scolded them for being too loud so early in the morning, but the others pointed out that it was already 10. Aizawa grumbled, insisting it was still too early for such chaos. Izuku took a moment to gather himself, relieved that the noise had subsided. Aizawa glanced at Izuku, a hint of a smile breaking through his irritation. He asked if everything had gone well the previous night, to which Izuku nodded. Aizawa's expression softened, showing a glimpse of relief. Just then, Izuku yawned, revealing his exhaustion. Yamada straightened up, asking if Izuku had slept well. Izuku nodded but knew he wasn't the best at lying, and his concern for 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 lingered in his mind. The lady he loved so much was now someone he could never see again. Izuku was sure 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 felt frustrated that he couldn't express his feelings to Inko. He knew he loved her deeply and cared for her immensely. He wanted to stay longer to comfort him but was unsure of what to say. Izuku yawned, covering his mouth, and Aizawa and Yamada frowned at him. Eri exclaimed that he was sleepy, causing Izuku to look down at her with wide eyes, surprised by her words. She repeated that he was sleepy, and with enthusiasm, she encouraged him, saying she was proud of him and that he was her hero. Eri walked over to Izuku, waving her hand in front of his face, standing on her tiptoes. She glanced back at the two older men and Hitoshi for reassurance, asking if she had said something wrong. Yamada assured her that he was just tired, echoing her sentiment. Aizawa approached Izuku, placing a hand on his shoulder to get his attention. He told Izuku it was time for him to go to bed, observing the dark circles under his eyes and sighing at how exhausted he looked. He thought about how he didn't want another sleep-deprived person in the house. Izuku protested, claiming he had slept well but just wanted to lay in bed longer. Aizawa, however, lifted him and placed him on the bed in his room, reminding him that he hadn't had the chance to sleep in his own space yet. He encouraged Izuku to rest and assured him he would also return to bed, grumbling about some people who had disturbed him. With a slight smile, he urged Izuku to get some rest before leaving the room. As Hitoshi was about to exit, he paused and turned to Izuku, wishing him a good morning, albeit awkwardly. He encouraged Izuku to get some good sleep before leaving, with only Eri remaining behind. She cheerfully wished him well as she skipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Izuku clenched his fists, wondering why she called him that. He lay down on his bed, covering himself with a thin blanket, letting out a weary sigh as he turned on his side, thinking of his mother before drifting off to sleep. After a good 3 hours, he woke up at 1 p.m. Rubbing his eyes and wobbling as he walked, he made his way to the kitchen. Yamada was cutting vegetables while Aizawa was frying something in a pan. Aizawa looked over at Izuku and smiled, asking how his sleep was. Izuku struggled to find the words to describe the peace he felt during that time, finally settling on a simple response that it was nice. Izuku had been living with Eraserhead and his family for a week now, and it felt great. They treated him with care, like a real family, something he had longed for. Eraserhead and Present Mike treated him like their own son, while Midnight acted like an affectionate aunt. Hitoshi seemed eager to befriend him, and Eri had quickly grown accustomed to his presence. Reflecting on the past and the things Overhaul had done to Eri, It was a relief to see her safe and happy. Despite their efforts to make him feel at home, Izuku felt like an outsider, as if he didn't belong. He watched them from a distance, feeling like a burden. At night, he would sneak out to fight against them, unaware of his true identity as the vigilante they were after. The thought of them discovering his secret filled him with dread. With Eraserhead and Present Mic away for a meeting with the Hero Commission, which he suspected was about him, Izuku sat in the living room with Hitoshi, playing dolls with Eri. His stomach churned with nervousness as he contemplated how to sneak out of the house. Hitoshi noticed his tension and asked if he was okay. Izuku fiddled with the doll, braiding its hair as he mentioned the vigilante Egao. Hitoshi nodded, revealing he didn't like Egao, which made Izuku sigh again, reminded of Hitoshi's disdain for the vigilante. If he were to ever find out that Egao was sitting right in front of him, it would surely lead to trouble. He always viewed Egao as a troublemaker, someone who would gain everyone's trust only to betray them. This suspicion likely intensified after I was framed and pretended to be a villain. Perhaps he thought I had lied to prove my innocence. Whatever the reason, it was clear he held a strong dislike for Egao, believing this vigilante was truly a villain. Many others online had also spread rumors. If I weren't Egao, I might have shared the same doubts. But I was Egao, and I knew my intentions were good. Eri spoke up, asking when her daddy and papa would return. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 5. They had been gone for about 4 hours. I wanted to reassure her that they were on their way back, but Eraserhead and Present Mic had said they would only be gone for 2 hours. If it took longer, the maximum delay would have been half an hour. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 chimed in, suggesting that it was an important meeting and that the heroes were likely engaged in significant planning to take down Egao and the villains. He handled the situation well, and I was grateful for his quick response. Eri pouted at 𝐶INSO's comment, always ready to defend me, or rather Egao. Living 2 lives was complicated. We continued playing with dolls until Eraserhead and Present Mic returned about 45 minutes later. They stood in the doorway, removing their shoes. Yamada called out from the hallway, announcing their return. Eri dashed to greet them, while Hitoshi and I picked up the toys and dolls before joining our guardians. Hitoshi crossed his arms, clearly annoyed, and asked what had taken them so long. The voice quirk hero raised his hands defensively and laughed awkwardly, apologizing for the delay. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow, skeptical of the explanation. He then turned to Aizawa, who was putting his shoes away, and asked what had happened during the meeting and what they had said about Egao. Aizawa replied that they still needed to pursue Egao, and I noticed a hint of sadness in his expression. It left me uncertain about how to feel. Why did he seem sad? Hitoshi let out a relieved sigh, expressing gratitude that they were still on Egao's trail. Eri playfully hit Hitoshi on the back of his leg for his reaction. Hizashi noticed the covered pot on the dining room table and looked back at us, worried that we hadn't eaten the dinner he had prepared. He asked if something was wrong with the food. I quickly reassured him that it was good, explaining that Eri had insisted on waiting for their return to eat. Hizashi lifted Eri into his arms and tossed her playfully into the air, catching her again and kissing her on the forehead. He then declared that it was time to eat. We gathered at the dinner table, where Katsudan awaited us. Hizashi served me a plate, and I hesitated, staring at it. This was my favorite dish, one my mom always made, and hers was the best. I picked up my chopsticks and took a bite, but as I placed them down, I found myself losing my appetite. The taste was good, but it brought back too many memories. I looked at Yamada and called out to him. He turned to me, finished chewing, and asked what was wrong. I pushed my plate back, feeling guilty for not being able to eat. I admitted that I wasn't hungry, avoiding his gaze. Surprisingly, he didn't seem angry and reassured me that it was okay, though they appeared worried about my lack of appetite. Eraserhead noticed my untouched plate and offered to cook something else for me. I appreciated the gesture but didn't want to trouble him. Hizashi suddenly interjected, insisting that Aizawa should not cook for me. Aizawa crossed his arms, glaring at his husband, questioning what was wrong with his cooking. Hizashi raised his eyebrows and pointed out that Aizawa often burned the food he prepared. Aizawa, looking offended, struggled to defend himself. Hitoshi, meanwhile, took Aries and his own empty plates to the sink, muttering that he would wash them later. Before I could process what had happened, Hitoshi grabbed my hand and Aries, leading us into the living room to escape the escalating argument between the two adults. I looked at Hitoshi, confused, and he explained that it would only get worse from there. Just as he spoke, we heard 𝐻𝐻𝗧𝗟𝗘 yell a curse, prompting Hitoshi to roll his eyes and cover Aries' ears, explaining that it wasn't appropriate for her. Following that, Hizashi yelled back a curse of his own. Hitoshi confirmed my understanding of the situation. Eri tugged at our sleeves, asking if we could go to her room to play with dolls. Hitoshi smiled softly at her and agreed, and I nodded in support. The three of us went upstairs to play and returned an hour later, finding that the yelling had ceased. Hizashi and Aizawa were now on the couch, embracing each other while watching a movie. Eri ran between them, hugging them tightly. As the hours passed, it was finally time for bed. Hizashi and Yamada tucked Eri in after saying goodnight to me and Hitoshi. I climbed into bed and stared at the time on my alarm clock, reflecting on the day. The decision weighed heavily on Egao as he contemplated whether to take the risk of leaving the house for patrol or to stay put. It had been a week since he last ventured out, and Eraserhead had expressed concern for him. He found himself staring at the alarm clock, the hours slipping by until it struck midnight. Feeling hopeless, he resolved to at least try to sneak out. Over the past week, he had observed the perimeter of the house, noting the locations of cameras and identifying a few blind spots. If he could just slip through one of those, he might be able to escape unnoticed. However, if he were caught, he would need a convincing excuse. Perhaps he could say he was heading to a friend's house or going to a party, even though he despised parties. They wouldn't know that, so it might work. With a sigh, he climbed out of bed, aware that getting caught could lead to dire consequences, reminiscent of his father's abandonment. After living with Eraserhead and the others for a week, making a move like this could end badly. Hesitantly, he approached his closet and retrieved his Vigilante costume, hidden at the back. It was a poor hiding spot, but he couldn't think of anything better at the moment. His costume was already packed in his yellow backpack from when he and Eraserhead had gathered his belongings. He had managed to keep it hidden from them, avoiding any risk of discovery. As he slipped his arm through the sleeve of his costume, he reflected on how the only thing that made that place feel like home was his mother. Now fully dressed in his vigilante gear, he prepared his mask, which hung loosely at his side. He quickly made his bed, arranging pillows and hoodies to create the illusion that he was still inside. After positioning everything just right, he walked to the window, donned his mask, and quietly slipped outside, careful to avoid the cameras. Standing atop his neighbor's roof, he glanced back at his window. He could return, but after gathering the courage to get this far, he felt it would be a waste. He leaped into the shadows of the neighborhood, ensuring he remained unseen. He figured Eraserhead had already left for his patrol and wondered if he was still waiting on the roof where they usually chatted during calm moments in the city. As he made his way to the roof, he paused, recalling his usual order of a caramel frappuccino for himself and coffee for Eraserhead. Tonight, however, he didn't feel like indulging in something sweet and creamy. It was midnight, and he realized that such drinks would only make him hyper, which was unhealthy. Coffee could have the same effect, and he found himself caught in a 𝐶𝐻𝐶L of temptation. Arriving at the cafe, he chuckled at the thought of Eraserhead and Hitoshi forming a coffee army. He shivered at the idea. He slipped into an alley behind the cafe, waiting a few minutes to avoid drawing attention. It had been a week since he last patrolled and picked up drinks, so perhaps they thought he wouldn't return. Just as he was about to leave, a voice called out to him. Egao turned to see Ayato, who had opened the back door of the cafe and was waving enthusiastically. Egao waved back, unsure how he kept running into the same people while balancing his identities. Ayato greeted him with a bright smile, asking if he wanted his usual order. Egao shook his head, requesting just 2 coffees instead. He sighed as he pulled out his wallet, extending his hand with the money. Ayato's curious orange eyes reflected concern as he hesitated to take the cash, studying Egao as if trying to read him through the mask. After a moment, Ayato expressed his worry about Egao's absence over the past week, asking if everything was all right. Egao felt a twinge of disbelief, Why would someone be concerned about him? He gave a half-hearted nod, assuring Ayato that he was fine and simply busy with life outside of vigilante work. Even he could sense the weakness in his own words. Silence hung between them as Ayato continued to look at him, searching for clues. Egao extended his arm further, breaking the tension. Ayato glanced at the money and then back at him, gently pushing his hand away and insisting that the drinks were on him. Egao felt a mix of gratitude and reluctance, urging him to accept the payment. Despite Egao's insistence, Ayato remained firm, smiling softly yet sympathetically. After several attempts to hand over the money, Ayato finally relented, sighing in defeat and taking the cash. It was unusual for Egao to be treated so casually. Most people acted nervously around him as Egao. Ayato returned from inside the cafe a few minutes later, presenting 2 medium-sized coffees with a warm smile. Egao accepted the drinks and bowed slightly in appreciation, thanking him for his kindness. "Good night, Ayato," she said as she turned away. He called out to her, asking her to wait. She glanced back at him, noticing the friendly and warm smile that could brighten anyone's day. He wanted her to call him by his first name, Daichi. She nodded in agreement, saying she would see him later. His smile grew even brighter at the sound of his name, and he gave her a thumbs up. As she began to leave, he waved his arms enthusiastically, bidding her farewell in his usual way. She started running across the rooftops, drinks in hand, moving swiftly to avoid spilling a drop. Upon reaching her destination, she carefully set the coffees down, anticipating what would happen next. Suddenly, a scarf flew toward her, wrapping around her. Eraserhead emerged from the shadows, a smirk on his face. As he approached, she slipped out of the scarf and jumped behind him. He quickly turned, attempting to kick her, but she dodged effortlessly. With a heavy sigh, he sat on the edge of the roof, admitting his fatigue. She walked over to the coffees, picked one up, and sat beside him, handing him a cup. He smiled softly and thanked her before taking a sip. She pulled out a metal straw and inserted it into her cup, slipping it under her mask to drink. Eraserhead watched her with wide eyes, a look of awe on his face, as if stars were shining in his gaze. His smile was striking. He exclaimed that she was drinking coffee, and she raised her eyebrows at his reaction, confirming it slowly. He let out a relieved sigh, expressing his gratitude that she had chosen coffee over sugary drinks. She found his reaction amusing but also a little concerning. As he took another sip, she stood up, scanning the area for any signs of trouble, reminding herself that she was on patrol. She sensed Eraserhead's gaze on her, and while she was focused on her surroundings, she was also trying to avoid a deeper conversation with him. Things felt awkward between them now. She reflected on her absence during the week and, sensing his concern, he asked if everything was all right. His worried expression reminded her of Ayato's concern. She felt grateful for their care but also burdened by it, wishing they didn't have to worry about her. She continued to look into the distance as she spoke, trying to find the right words. When she had explained her situation to Ayato, it seemed he hadn't fully believed her. She admitted to Eraserhead that she had been struggling with some issues at home but assured him that things had improved. She sighed, realizing her words didn't sound convincing. He pressed further, inquiring if it was a financial or relationship issue. She turned to him, contemplating her response. She knew she had to be careful with her words, but it seemed to fit the category of a relationship issue. Eraserhead asked if it was trouble with a spouse or children, and she felt taken aback by his assumptions. While she pondered how to respond, he offered his willingness to listen, emphasizing their shared humanity despite their different roles. She appreciated his offer but felt hesitant. She assured him that things were better now and decided to continue her patrol. As she moved away, she thought she heard him mutter something under his breath, but she dismissed it. She glanced back to see him setting down his coffee cup, still partially full, as he prepared to patrol the opposite side. Soon, she discovered 3 villains in an alleyway, plotting to attack Endeavor's hero agency under the orders of someone named Dabi. She had her reservations about intervening, given her past experiences with Endeavor. She recalled the time she had reached out for help, only to be dismissed and ridiculed. The notion that abuse was a form of discipline was infuriating to her. Despite her personal feelings toward 𝗏𝗏𝗏, she recognized that innocent people worked at his agency, and she couldn't let her grudges cloud her judgment. It was her moral duty to act. With a sigh, she jumped into the alley. The moment her feet hit the ground, she swiftly took down one of the villains with a series of quick, precise moves. The other two quickly assumed fighting stances, alert and ready. She assessed their positions and reactions, noting their amateurish demeanor. She couldn't underestimate them, though, as she was unsure of their quirks. The villain to her right had fish scales on his skin, suggesting he might have a water-related quirk or the ability to transform into an aquatic creature. She wondered how the second villain would contribute to the fight. Unless it was a shark or some ferocious creature, the situation felt uncertain. The villain on the left had an unusual appearance, particularly his bright blue hair, which stood out. However, it was his eyes that truly caught attention. They seemed to flicker with flames, suggesting he possessed a fire quirk. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps he had targeted 𝗏𝗏𝗏's agency to prove his strength, given their similar abilities. As expected, the villain on my left unleashed fireballs aimed at me. I dodged them easily, but just as I did, the villain on my right attacked as well. He had a water quirk, launching a powerful blast that I narrowly avoided, though I ended up slightly drenched. I suppressed an exaggerated sigh as we faced each other in the alleyway, the tension palpable. The two villains glared at me, their quirks still active, indicating their caution. The fire-wielding villain charged at me, shooting flames as I retreated, careful not to turn my back. Realizing I was nearing a dead end, I shifted my strategy and charged toward him instead. He prepared for a hit, but at the last moment, I leaped over him and kicked him against the wall. As he struggled to recover, the water villain caught up, and I noticed a drop of water land on my glove. Looking up, I realized he had summoned a large amount of water above me. With a sigh of exasperation, I acknowledged the situation. Soon enough, the three villains lay unconscious at my feet, and I was soaked. I had sensed a presence on the roof since the water incident, but I was not surprised when Eraserhead jumped down to greet me. He commented on my drenched state, and I responded with a hint of sarcasm. Eraserhead explained that some villains had attacked 𝗏𝗏𝗏's agency, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏, in his fury, had gone to confront them alone. I realized there could be more villains around, and I pointed in a direction we hadn't checked yet, expressing my intention to investigate further. Eraserhead hesitated, reminding me that 𝗏𝗏𝗏 had instructed against interference. He warned me that 𝗏𝗏𝗏's anger could lead to trouble, but I was determined to prioritize safety over his ego. Just then, I heard screams from a small group of people nearby. Adjusting my gloves, I prepared to leap onto the rooftops. As I jumped from building to building, I headed toward the source of the commotion. I quickly assessed the situation: 4 males, 3 females, 2 children, and 1 villain who called himself 𝐵LD_. He was a rookie villain, only 19 years old, and I recalled seeing his story on the news. 𝐵LD_ charged at me with a knife, red tendrils resembling 𝐵LD protruding from his back. His tragic past echoed in my mind. He had endured bullying and abuse, which had led him to this dark path. When he attempted to stab me, I dodged, but the tendrils struck me several times. He was powerful, fueled by the pain he had suffered. In a moment of desperation, I shouted to the horrified onlookers to flee. The parents grabbed their children and ran, while I focused on stopping 𝐵LD_. He had taken a dark turn, but I was determined to confront him and prevent further harm. It turned out to be his last lesson, and his classmates' last lesson as well. Once they were gone, he and 𝐵LD_ engaged in a fierce fight. 𝐵LD_ was reckless, unpredictable, and his fighting style was monstrous, which made him incredibly powerful. When the bell rang for lunch, his classmates approached him to mock and attack him, just like they did every day. But that day was different. He was about to do something unexpected. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 unleashed his red tendrils, striking him in the side, then in the thigh, and finally in the shoulder. As his classmates continued to torment him, he retaliated with his tendrils, piercing them and causing chaos. Their cries echoed through the halls as he spread fear throughout the school, making it clear that he would no longer tolerate their bullying. He instilled a deep sense of dread in every one of those tormentors. He slammed him against a wall, and before he could react, 𝐵LD was in front of him, pressing his hand against his neck in an attempt to choke him. He managed to kick him off. Why did he understand him? Suddenly, he noticed a young boy crying and screaming nearby, clearly terrified by the fight. The boy seemed to be alone, likely separated from his guardian. Where were the parents? Why did this always happen? 𝐵LD shot out more tendrils, and he dodged while retreating. He quickly grabbed the boy and moved him to a safer area just a few feet away, ensuring he was out of harm's way. Turning back, he saw 𝐵LD standing in front of a purple portal. It looked familiar. Hadn't 𝐒𝐮𝐴d mentioned that the League of Villains had a member who could create purple portals with their quirk? Panic surged through him. He dashed toward the portal, pulling out one of his knives from his utility belt and throwing it at 𝐵LD, who dodged it effortlessly. 𝐵LD stood at the portal, staring back at him with gritted teeth, promising that the next time they met, he would hollow him out. Then he fell back into the portal. He let out a heavy sigh as he returned to the boy. Just as he reached him, a man and woman rushed over, and the boy jumped into their arms. The couple expressed their gratitude in a hurried voice, thanking him for saving their child as they hurried away from the scene, trying to distance themselves from him. Now, he was alone at the scene, looking down at his wounds with a sigh. He stared at the spot where the portal and 𝐵LD had been just moments before, wondering if he would have ended up like him. He took a moment to ponder before making his way away from the scene, focusing on the present. Now was not the time to think about the League of Villains, 𝐵LD, or himself. He had more villains to confront.